They threw her gingerbread cookies in the trash. Then they threw her out on Christmas morning. Clara Whitmore never imagined that baking her father's recipe would destroy her life. One plate of cookies, one moment of cruel laughter, one Christmas that turned her from invisible to infamous. By dawn, she was homeless, humiliated, and holding everything she owned in a canvas bag. But when a mysterious rancher offered her a choice between shame and survival, Clara learned that sometimes the people who save you are the ones everyone warns you about. Stay until the end to see how one woman turned rejection into revolution. Like this video and comment what city you're watching from so I can see how far this story travels. The town hall of Silver Ridge had never looked more beautiful, and Clara Whitmore had never felt more invisible. She stood at the edge of the community Christmas celebration, her worn boots barely crossing the threshold, watching families laugh and embrace beneath strings of hand-cut paper snowflakes and pine garlands that filled the air with the sharp, clean scent of winter. The hall glowed with warmth. Dozens of candles flickered on every available surface, their light dancing across the faces of people who belonged here, who had always belonged here. Clara didn't belong. She never had. She clutched the ceramic plate tighter against her chest, feeling the weight of the gingerbread horses she'd spent 2 days perfecting. Her fingers ached from the cold walk into town, from the careful rolling and cutting, from the precise piping of white icing manes and saddles. Each cookie was a memory, her father's hands guiding hers when she was 7, his patient voice explaining how to keep the dough from cracking, how to make something beautiful from simple ingredients. "You put love in it, Clara Bear," he used to say. "That's the secret ingredient nobody can buy." Marcus Whitmore had been dead for 3 years, and Clara still heard his voice every time she stepped into a kitchen. "Are you going to stand there all night like a ghost, or are you actually going to participate?" The sharp voice cut through Clara's reverie. She turned to find her stepmother, Lorraine Whitmore, bearing down on her with the expression of someone who'd discovered spoiled meat in her pantry. Lorraine was dressed in deep burgundy silk, her graying hair swept up in an elaborate style that must have taken her maid an hour to perfect. Everything about Lorraine was carefully constructed. Her posture, her smile, the way she held her glass of spiced cider as if it were fine champagne. "I brought cookies," Claire said quietly, lifting the plate slightly. "For the children's table, like you asked." Lorraine's eyes swept over the gingerbread horses with the kind of disdain usually reserved for stray dogs. "I asked you to contribute something appropriate. Store-bought items were perfectly acceptable. I didn't ask you to create." The word create dripped with contempt. Clara felt heat rise to her cheeks. "Father's recipe. The children always loved them when he—" "Your father is gone, Clara. Stop living in the past like some tragic heroine in a penny novel. It's pathetic." Lorraine plucked the plate from Clara's hands with practiced efficiency. "Put them on the dessert table and try not to draw attention to yourself. The mayor and his wife are here tonight, and I won't have you embarrassing this family with your presence." Before Clara could respond, Lorraine swept away in a rustle of silk, leaving her stepdaughter standing alone in the crowded hall. This was Clara's life now, 3 years of it. When her father died, the modest house they'd shared on Maple Street had passed to Lorraine, his second wife of barely 18 months. Clara, at 23, had suddenly found herself a guest in her own home. Tolerated, not wanted. Lorraine made it clear that Clara's continued residence was an act of charity, one that could be revoked at any moment if she didn't prove herself useful. So Clara cooked. She cleaned. She kept herself small and quiet, hoping that if she just did enough, gave enough, erased herself enough, she might earn the right to stay in the only home she'd ever known. The dessert table was already crowded with elaborate cakes and pastries that Clara knew came from the bakery on Main Street, the expensive one that charged prices no ordinary family could afford. She found a small space near the edge and set down her plate of gingerbread horses, arranging them carefully so they looked their best. They looked humble next to the fancy desserts. Simple. Honest. Just like her. "Miss Clara! Miss Clara!" A small tornado in the form of 7-year-old Tommy Fletcher crashed into her skirts, his face flushed with excitement. His younger sister, Annie, toddled behind him, her thumb firmly planted in her mouth. "Did you bring the horses?" Tommy asked, his eyes bright with hope. "You said you would. You promised." Clara's heart squeezed. Tommy and Annie were the children of the town blacksmith, a kind man who'd lost his wife 2 winters ago. Clara sometimes brought them cookies when she walked past the smithy, small moments of sweetness in what she knew were difficult days. "I did," she said, kneeling down to his level, "right there on the table. Do you see them?" Tommy's face split into a grin that made every hour of work worthwhile. He grabbed Annie's hand and dragged her toward the dessert table, chattering excitedly about which horse he was going to pick. "Those are lovely." Clara stood and found herself facing Ethan Calloway. She knew who he was, of course. Everyone in Silver Ridge knew Ethan Calloway. He owned the largest cattle ranch in 3 counties, a sprawling property that employed a dozen men and supplied beef to towns as far as the rail line could reach. He was 32, unmarried, and the subject of considerable speculation among the town's mothers with unmarried daughters. What Clara knew most about Ethan Calloway was that he rarely came to town. He stood before her now, tall and solid in a clean white shirt and dark vest, his hat held respectfully in his hands. His hair was dark, touched with early silver at the temples, and his eyes were the color of creek water in summer, clear and direct and unsettling in their focus. He was looking at her gingerbread horses. "Thank you," Clara managed, unsure what else to say. Men like Ethan Calloway didn't usually speak to women like her, didn't usually speak to anyone much, from what she'd heard. He had a reputation for being solitary, serious, a man who preferred the company of horses and open land to the social obligations of town life. "Did you make them?" he asked. "Yes, sir." "They're detailed, the saddles, the bridles. Someone taught you well." Clara felt something warm unfold in her chest. "My father. He said cookies should make people smile." Ethan's expression shifted slightly, something that might have been understanding. "Marcus Whitmore." "You knew him?" "Bought horses from him years back. He was an honest man, fair dealer." Ethan's eyes moved from the cookies to Clara's face. "You have his eyes." Before Clara could respond, a sharp laugh cut through the air. "Ethan Calloway, as I live and breathe!" Margaret Winters, the mayor's wife, descended on them like a ship in full sail, her green taffeta dress rustling with each purposeful step. She was a handsome woman in her late 40s, with the kind of confidence that came from never having been told no in her entire life. "How rare to see you at one of our community gatherings," Margaret said, her smile bright and predatory. "I was just telling Henry that we should send someone to drag you down from that ranch of yours. You're becoming quite the hermit." "Mrs. Winters," Ethan said with a polite nod, his voice carefully neutral. Margaret's eyes slid to Clara, and something cold flickered across her face. "Clara Whitmore, I see you've cornered our most eligible bachelor. How resourceful." The words were light, teasing, but the meaning beneath them was sharp as broken glass. Clara took a step back. "I was just admiring her work," Ethan finished, his voice firm. "These cookies are exceptional." Margaret glanced at the dessert table, at the humble gingerbread horses surrounded by expensive pastries, and her smile turned pitying. "How sweet! A dying art, really. My grandmother used to make those little shaped cookies. Of course, that was before bakeries made such things obsolete." 2 other women had joined them now, drawn by Margaret's voice like moths to flame. Clara recognized them. Sarah Hendricks and Patricia Moore, Margaret's constant companions and echoes. "Oh, are those yours, Clara?" Sarah asked, her voice dripping with false sweetness. "How nostalgic." Patricia picked up one of the horses, examining it like a curiosity in a museum. "Gingerbread horses, like something from a children's fairy tale." "The children seem to enjoy them," Ethan said, gesturing toward Tommy and Annie, who were carefully selecting their cookies with the seriousness of jewelers choosing diamonds. Margaret laughed, a sound like breaking crystal. "Oh, children enjoy all sorts of things. Mud pies, catching frogs. That doesn't make them suitable for a sophisticated Christmas celebration." "I didn't mean to," Clara started, but her voice was too soft, too uncertain. "Of course you didn't," Margaret said, her tone softening into something worse than cruelty, pity. "That's always been your problem, hasn't it, dear? You don't mean to do anything. You just exist, taking up space, wearing those sad dresses and baking these sad little cookies, living off poor Lorraine's charity like some eternal orphan. Clara felt the blood drain from her face. "That's enough," Ethan said, his voice low and hard. But Margaret was warming to her subject now, and she had an audience. More people were drifting over, drawn by the change in atmosphere, the subtle shift that signaled entertainment at someone else's expense. "I'm simply being honest," Margaret continued, gesturing at Clara with one gloved hand. "Look at her, 26 years old and absolutely nothing to show for it. No husband, no prospects, no purpose. Just these childish crafts and that martyred expression, as if the world has somehow wronged her by expecting her to grow up." Clara's hands were shaking. She clasped them together, trying to stop the trembling, but it spread up her arms, into her chest. "The horses are detailed work," Ethan said again, his jaw tight. "They take skill." "Skill?" Patricia laughed. "Any housewife with flour and molasses can make cookies, Mr. Calloway. It's not an accomplishment. It's basic domestic labor, the bare minimum expected of any woman with access to a kitchen." Sarah picked up another horse, examining it with exaggerated interest. "Though I suppose when one has no other talents to speak of, one must cling to whatever small abilities one possesses. How sad that Clara's peak achievement is gingerbread." The group around them was growing. Clara could feel their eyes on her, could hear the whispers starting. Someone giggled, a young woman her own age, someone Clara had gone to school with years ago. "Gentlemen," Margaret announced loudly, "may I present Silver Ridge's most accomplished baker of children's treats. Perhaps we should commission her for all our future nursery parties." More laughter now, real laughter, spreading through the crowd like fire through dry grass. Clara wanted to disappear, to sink through the floorboards, to evaporate like morning frost. "Stop," she whispered, but the word was too small, too quiet. "What was that, dear?" Margaret cupped her ear in mock concern. "You'll have to speak up." "Though I suppose someone who spends all her time hiding in her stepmother's house wouldn't know how to project her voice." Ethan stepped forward, putting himself partially between Clara and the women. "Mrs. Winters, this is inappropriate." "Is it?" Margaret's eyes flashed. "I think what's inappropriate is watching a grown woman play at being a child, baking cookies and dreaming of her dead father, contributing nothing to this community except awkwardness and pity." Someone needed to tell her the truth. "I'm simply being kind enough to do it publicly, so we can all stop pretending." The words hit Clara like physical blows. She stumbled backward, her vision blurring. This was it. This was the moment she'd always feared. The moment when everyone saw what Lorraine saw, what Clara herself had always suspected, that she was worthless, pathetic, a burden. The children loved them. The small voice cut through the laughter. Tommy Fletcher stood at the edge of the crowd, a half-eaten gingerbread horse in his hand, his face set in fierce determination. "Miss Clara's cookies are the best cookies in the whole world. They taste like... He struggled for words, his child's vocabulary failing him. "Like when things are good, like before Mama died and everything was happy." Annie nodded vigorously beside him, clutching her own cookie to her chest like treasure. Margaret's smile didn't waver. How precious. Children defending their little playmate. But that's exactly my point, dear. She turned back to Clara. You exist at the level of children. You think like them, act like them, create for them. You've never grown beyond needing a father to guide your hands, have you? Clara felt something break inside her chest. She'd tried. For 3 years, she'd tried to be smaller, quieter, better. She'd swallowed every criticism from Lorraine, every cold look, every reminder that she was there on sufferance. She'd made herself useful, indispensable even, running the household while Lorraine socialized. She'd hoped that if she just did enough, gave enough, erased herself enough. But it would never be enough. Because the problem wasn't what she did. The problem was who she was. Margaret reached for Clara's plate, her intentions clear. She was going to throw them away. Right here, right now, in front of everyone, the final humiliation. These don't belong at a respectable celebration, Margaret announced. They're bringing down the tone of the entire... Ethan Calloway's hand shot out and caught the plate. The hall went silent. I'll take them, he said quietly. Margaret's eyes widened. Excuse me? The cookies, I'll take them. Ethan removed the plate from her grasp with careful deliberation. Then, maintaining eye contact with the mayor's wife, he picked up one of the gingerbread horses and bit into it. The sound of his chewing was loud in the sudden quiet. Everyone watched as he finished the cookie, then reached for another. This, Ethan said, his voice carrying across the hall, tastes like home. He looked around the room, at the faces frozen in various expressions of shock and confusion, like the kind of home where someone cares enough to spend hours making something with their own hands, where effort matters more than expense, where tradition isn't something bought from a bakery display case. His eyes found Margaret's. Maybe some people have forgotten what that tastes like. Margaret's face flushed deep red. Mr. Calloway, I hardly think— These cookies, Ethan continued, were made by someone who understands that the best things can't be purchased. They're earned, through patience, through care, through the kind of skill that comes from loving the work itself, not the recognition it might bring. He looked at Clara, really looked at her, and his expression softened. Your father would be proud. Clara couldn't speak, couldn't breathe. The room remained frozen for another long moment. Then Patricia Moore gave a nervous laugh. Well, aren't you the gallant defender? But really, Mr. Calloway, there's no need to— There's every need, Ethan said, his voice hardening. What I've witnessed here tonight is not sophisticated. It's not refined. It's cruel. He turned to face the crowd fully. You should all be ashamed. The words hung in the air like an accusation. Sarah Hendricks bristled. I beg your pardon. We were simply having a bit of fun. At the expense of someone who's never done anything to harm you, Ethan interrupted. Someone whose only crime is being different from what you expect. Someone who still believes that kindness and effort have value. He looked down at the remaining cookies on the plate. You're right about one thing, Mrs. Winters. These cookies are childish. They remind us of being children, of that time before we learned to be cruel for sport, before we turned meanness into entertainment. Margaret's mouth opened and closed, but no sound came out. Ethan set the plate down carefully on the dessert table, then turned to Clara. She stood frozen, tears streaming silently down her face, her hands clenched so tightly her nails were cutting into her palms. Miss Whitmore, he said gently, would you like to leave? She managed a small nod. Then let's go. He offered his arm. Clara stared at it for a long moment, unable to process what was happening. Ethan Calloway, the man who owned half the county, who could have any woman in Silver Ridge with a word, was offering to escort her out of her own humiliation. She took his arm. They walked through the silent crowd together. People parted like water, creating a pathway to the door. Clara kept her eyes fixed straight ahead, not looking at their faces, not wanting to see pity or judgment or satisfaction. Behind them, she heard Margaret Winters' sharp voice trying to reclaim control of the situation. Well, how dramatic! I suppose we should expect such theatrics from a man who spends all his time alone on a ranch. But Clara didn't hear the rest. They stepped out into the cold December night, and the door swung shut behind them, muffling the voices inside. The street was empty and dark, lit only by the moon and the warm glow spilling from the hall's windows. Clara's breath came out in white clouds, and she realized she'd left her shawl inside. She was shaking, from cold, from shock, from the aftermath of adrenaline. Ethan removed his jacket and draped it over her shoulders without a word. Thank you, Clara whispered. Her voice cracked. You didn't have to. Yes, I did. They stood in silence for a moment. From inside the hall came the sound of music starting up again, conversation resuming, life going on as if nothing had happened. I should go home, Clara said finally. Before Lorraine, and she'll be furious. Ethan nodded slowly. She knew what they were doing in there. Your stepmother. I saw her standing with Mayor Winters when it started. She could have stopped it. Clara closed her eyes. Of course Lorraine had been there. Of course she'd watched and done nothing. Maybe she'd even arranged it somehow, a convenient way to further establish that Clara was an embarrassment, a problem to be managed. It doesn't matter, Clara said. Nothing matters except staying out of her way. That's no way to live. It's the only way I have. Ethan studied her in the moonlight. Your father left you nothing? No inheritance? Clara laughed bitterly. He left everything to Lorraine, the house, his savings, all of it. He thought she'd take care of me, that I'd be family to her. She pulled his jacket tighter around her shoulders. He was wrong. So you stay because you have nowhere else to go? It wasn't a question. Clara didn't answer. She didn't need to. I should return your jacket, she said instead, starting to shrug it off. Keep it tonight. Bring it by the ranch when you can. I can't. Clara! He said her name simply, without formality, and it stopped her protest. Keep it, please. She nodded, too exhausted to argue. Ethan retrieved his hat from where he'd left it just inside the hall door, careful not to let anyone draw him back into conversation. When he returned, he looked at her one more time. What they said in there, it wasn't true, any of it. You don't know me well enough to know that. I know enough. He settled his hat on his head. I know you spent 2 days making cookies for children who aren't yours. I know you learned a skill to honor your father's memory. I know you walked into a room full of people who've never shown you kindness, and you still brought something you made with care. He paused. That's not weakness, Clara. That's strength they don't have. Before she could respond, he tipped his hat and walked away into the darkness, his footsteps echoing on the frozen street. Clara stood alone outside the town hall, wrapped in a stranger's jacket, and allowed herself to cry. She cried for her father, who'd trusted the wrong woman. She cried for the home that wasn't hers anymore. She cried for the girl she'd been before her world turned cold, the one who believed that being good and kind and useful would be enough. Most of all, she cried because she knew that when she walked back into Lorraine's house tonight, everything would be worse. She was right. Clara returned to find every light in the house blazing. Lorraine was waiting in the parlor, still dressed in her burgundy silk, a glass of brandy in her hand. Sit down. Clara sat. Lorraine didn't speak immediately. She swirled her brandy, watching the liquid catch the lamplight, her expression controlled and cold. Do you have any idea, she finally said, her voice dangerously quiet, what you've cost me tonight? I didn't mean to Shut up. Lorraine set down her glass with precise force. I have spent 3 years building a reputation in this town, 3 years cultivating relationships with people who matter. The mayor's wife has been my closest ally, opening doors that would have remained closed to a second wife from a modest background. She stood, beginning to pace. Tonight, you humiliated her, in front of half the town, with your pathetic cookies and your tears and your dramatic exit on the arm of Ethan Calloway. She was cruel, Clara said softly. She was right. Lorraine whirled to face her. Everything Margaret said about you was absolutely true. You are pathetic. You are useless. You contribute nothing except awkwardness and obligation. She moved closer, looming over Clara's chair. Your father saddled me with you like some burdensome debt. Take care of Clara, he said. She's delicate. She needs family. Well, I've done my Christian duty for 3 years, and this is how you repay me? By making me look like a fool? Clara's throat tightened. I'll apologize. To Mrs. Winters. Tomorrow, I'll apologize? Lorraine laughed harshly. You think an apology will fix this? Margaret Winters will dine out on this story for months. The pitiful stepdaughter and her gingerbread horses, defended by the hermit rancher like some damsel in a Gothic novel. I'll be a laughingstock. Then tell me what to do, Clara pleaded. Tell me how to fix it. Lorraine looked at her for a long moment, something calculating moving behind her eyes. You can't fix it, she said finally, but you can remove yourself from the equation. Clara's blood ran cold. What? I want you gone, Clara. Out of my house. Out of my life. Lorraine returned to her chair, picking up her brandy with steady hands. I've tolerated you out of obligation to your father's memory, but that obligation ends now. You've proven tonight that you're more liability than asset. This is my home, Clara whispered. My father's house was left to me. Every brick, every board, every stick of furniture, legally, morally, completely mine. Lorraine sipped her brandy. And I want it back. The room spun. Clara gripped the arms of her chair, trying to steady herself. Where am I supposed to go?
Frankly, my dear, I don't care. You have friends, don't you? Those women at church who pity you? Perhaps one of them will take you in. Lorraine's smile was cruel. Or perhaps your gallant rancher will offer you a position. He seemed quite taken with you. You can't. I can. I will. Lorraine finished her brandy and stood. I'm retiring now.
I have a headache from the evening's dramatics. When I wake up tomorrow morning, Christmas morning, as it happens, I expect you to be gone. Clara stared at her. Tomorrow? You're throwing me out on Christmas Day? Considerate motivation to move quickly. Lorraine paused at the doorway. Take only what's yours. Any of Marcus's possessions remain with me, as is my right. You may take your clothes, your personal items, and whatever small pittance you have saved. I have nowhere to go, Clara said again, her voice breaking. Lorraine's expression didn't soften. Then I suggest you start solving that problem immediately. You have, she consulted the mantel clock, approximately 9 hours before I expect this house to be yours free. She left, her footsteps echoing up the stairs. Clara sat in the parlor until the lamps began to burn low. Then she climbed the stairs to her small room, the room that had been hers since childhood, with its window overlooking the oak tree her father had planted the year she was born. She owned very little. It all fit easily into the worn canvas bag her father had used for traveling. 2 dresses, some undergarments, a hairbrush, a few ribbons. Her father's recipe book, the pages soft with use, his handwriting filling the margins with notes and variations. A small framed photograph of him holding her as a baby, her mother, dead since Clara was 2, smiling beside them. That was it. 26 years of life, and it all fit in one bag. Clara sat on the edge of her bed and tried to think. She had $11.37 saved from the small allowance Lorraine had given her for household shopping. She had no friends close enough to impose upon, no relatives except a distant cousin in Philadelphia she'd never met. She had nothing. She was nothing, just like Margaret Winters said. Clara didn't sleep that night. She sat by her window and watched the stars wheel overhead, watched the sky slowly lighten from black to gray to the pale blue of Christmas morning. When the clock struck 7, she picked up her bag and walked down the stairs one final time. Lorraine was already awake, sitting in the dining room with tea and toast, reading a letter as if this were any ordinary morning. Goodbye, Lorraine, Clara said quietly. Her stepmother didn't look up. Leave your key on the hall table. Clara did. She stepped out into the street, into the brittle cold of Christmas morning, and pulled the door closed behind her. The sound of it latching felt like a coffin lid closing. Silver Ridge was silent. Every house showed warm lights in windows, families gathered around breakfast tables, children playing with new toys. The church bells began to ring, calling people to Christmas service. Clara walked with no destination in mind. She couldn't go to church, couldn't bear the stares, the whispers, the pity. She walked away from the center of town, toward the edge where houses gave way to open land, where the road led north toward the ranches and farms that supplied Silver Ridge with food and work and purpose. Her feet were numb with cold. The sun was fully up now, bright and merciless, making the snow-covered fields sparkle like broken glass. She walked for over an hour, until the town was just a smudge behind her, until she was utterly alone on an empty road with nowhere to go and no one waiting for her. That's when she heard the horse. Clara turned to see a rider approaching from behind, moving at an easy canter. Even at a distance, she recognized the tall, straight bearing, the dark hat. Ethan Calloway pulled his horse to a stop beside her. He looked at the bag in her hand, at her face, and something shifted in his expression. She threw you out. It wasn't a question. Clara nodded, not trusting her voice. Ethan dismounted, his boots crunching in the snow. On Christmas morning. I embarrassed her. Last night, the town hall. Clara's voice cracked. She said I had to leave. Where are you going? Clara looked down the empty road, at the endless white fields, at the vast empty sky. I don't know. Ethan was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, I need a cook. Clara's head snapped up. What? At the ranch. I have 12 men working for me. I've been doing the cooking myself, and I'm terrible at it. He said it matter-of-factly, without embarrassment. The men complained constantly. Last week, 3 of them threatened to quit if I made beans one more time. Mr. Calloway.
There's a cabin. Small, but private. It was built for my ranch foreman's wife before she passed. It's been empty for 2 years. He looked at her directly. Room, board, and fair wages. In exchange for 3 meals a day and keeping the main house kitchen clean. Clara's throat tightened. Why? Because you need work and I need a cook. You don't know me. I could be a terrible cook. You're not. He gestured at her bag. Anyone who spends 2 days making gingerbread horses knows how to cook. And anyone who walks out of that town with her head high knows how to work. My head wasn't high, Clara whispered. I was crying. But you walked out. You didn't stay and beg or apologize for existing. That takes strength. Ethan stepped closer. I'm offering honest work, Clara. Not charity. You'll earn every dollar. The men are rough but fair. The work is hard. But you'll have a place of your own and wages in your pocket at the end of every month. Clara looked back toward Silver Ridge, toward the town that had never wanted her, the family that had rejected her, the life that had never quite fit.
Then she looked at Ethan Calloway, this man who defended her when no one else would, who was offering her dignity instead of pity, work instead of shame. I don't have anywhere else to go, she admitted. I know. I don't have any other options. I know that too. Clara took a shaky breath. Then yes, I'll work for you. Ethan nodded once, then moved to his horse and mounted. He extended his hand down to her. Give me your bag. She handed it up to him, and he secured it to his saddle. Then he reached down again. Give me your hand. Clara looked at his outstretched hand, at the calluses and scars of a man who worked with his body, who built things with his own strength. She looked back one more time at the town in the distance, at everything she was leaving behind. Then she placed her hand in his. Ethan pulled her up behind him in one smooth motion. Clara had never ridden a horse before, and she grabbed instinctively at his shoulders to steady herself. Hold on, he said quietly. She wrapped her arms around his waist, feeling the solid warmth of him through his jacket. Ethan turned the horse north, away from Silver Ridge, toward the open land and distant mountains. As they rode away, Clara looked back one final time. The town grew smaller and smaller until it disappeared entirely, swallowed by distance and snow and the vast indifferent sky. When she finally turned forward again, facing the unknown future ahead, she felt something unexpected blooming in her chest. It wasn't hope. Not yet. But it was close. It was the possibility of hope. And for Clara Whitmore, on Christmas morning, with all her worldly possessions in a canvas bag and her arms around a stranger, possibility was enough. The ride took 2 hours, and Clara spent most of it trying not to fall off the horse, while simultaneously trying not to think about what she'd just agreed to. The landscape changed gradually as they moved north. The manicured fields and white-fenced properties near Silver Ridge giving way to wilder country, where the land rolled in long waves and pine forests pressed close to the narrow road. Ethan didn't speak, and Clara was grateful for the silence. Her mind was too full, too chaotic to make conversation. Every few minutes she'd realize anew what had happened. She was homeless, unemployed, riding behind a man she barely knew, to a place she'd never seen to do work she'd never done professionally. The panic would rise in her throat, and she'd have to force it down by focusing on immediate things. The rhythm of the horse's gait, the cold air against her face, the solid warmth of Ethan's back against her arms. When they finally crested a hill and the ranch came into view, Clara's breath caught. The Calloway Ranch sprawled across a valley like something from a painting. The main house was a long, low structure built of dark timber and river stone, with a wide porch that wrapped around 3 sides. Behind it stood a massive barn, corrals holding dozens of cattle, and several smaller outbuildings she couldn't identify. Smoke rose from multiple chimneys, and she could see figures moving between buildings, the ranch hands, going about their morning work. Everything about it spoke of careful planning and hard labor. This wasn't inherited wealth or lucky investment. This was built, day by day, board by board, by someone who understood the value of honest work. Ethan guided the horse down the slope toward a small cabin set apart from the main buildings, nestled against a stand of pines. It was simple but well-maintained, with a stone chimney and 2 windows flanking a blue-painted door. "That's yours," he said, the first words he'd spoken since they left the road. Clara stared at it. Her own cabin.
Her own door, her own space that no one could take away on a whim. The tears came before she could stop them. Ethan brought the horse to a halt and dismounted, then reached up to help her down. His hands were steady on her waist as he lifted her, setting her gently on the frozen ground. When he saw her face, wet with silent tears, his expression softened. "It's not much," he said, "but it's sound, warm, private." "It's perfect," Clara managed. "I'm sorry, I don't mean to—" "Don't apologize for feeling things." He retrieved her bag from the saddle and handed it to her. "Come on. I'll show you inside, then we'll get you settled before lunch." The cabin's interior was sparse but clean. One room served as both living space and bedroom, with a narrow bed pushed against one wall, a small table with 2 chairs, and a rocking chair near the fireplace. A door led to a tiny kitchen area with a cast-iron stove and basic supplies. Everything was dusted, as if someone had been keeping it ready. "I'll have one of the men bring firewood," Ethan said, moving to open the damper in the chimney. "You'll want to keep the fire going. Nights get cold up here." Clara set her bag on the bed, her hand trailing over the quilt that covered it. The fabric was worn but carefully mended. The pattern, a simple star design in blues and creams. "My mother made that," Ethan said quietly. "Before she passed. I thought, well, it seemed wrong to leave it in storage." Clara turned to him, this tall, reserved man who'd given a homeless woman his mother's quilt. "Mr. Calloway." "Ethan. If we're going to be working together, you should call me Ethan." "Ethan," she corrected, testing the name. "I don't know how to thank you." "Cook decent food and don't burn down my kitchen. That'll be thanks enough." He moved toward the door, then paused. The men eat at 6 in the morning, noon, and 6 at night. Breakfast is usually simple: eggs, bacon, bread, coffee. They work hard, so they eat a lot. Lunch and dinner need to be substantial. Clara nodded, her mind already cataloging what she knew how to make, what ingredients she'd need, how to scale recipes for a dozen hungry men. "I'll take you to the main house in an hour," Ethan continued. "Show you the kitchen, introduce you to the men. For today, just make something simple. Tomorrow, you can plan properly." He pulled open the door, letting in a gust of cold air. "And Clara, the men will test you. They'll make jokes, push boundaries, see how you react. Don't take it personally. They do it to everyone new." "I understand." He nodded once and left, closing the door behind him. Clara stood in the center of her new home, her home, and slowly turned in a circle, taking it all in. The space was small enough that she could touch both walls if she stretched out her arms, but it was hers. No Lorraine to dictate her movements, no stepmother to make her feel like an unwelcome guest in her own life. She unpacked her bag, hanging her 2 dresses on pegs by the bed, setting her father's recipe book on the small table. The photograph of her parents she placed on the mantel above the fireplace next to a simple oil lamp. When she was done, the cabin still looked nearly empty, but it looked lived in. Like someone existed here. Like someone mattered. Clara sat in the rocking chair and allowed herself 5 minutes to simply be. To feel the weight of the morning, the terror and relief and uncertainty all tangled together. To acknowledge that she was terrified, but also, somehow, more herself than she'd been in 3 years. Then she stood up, smoothed her dress, and went to meet her new life head-on. The main house kitchen was enormous, 3 times the size of the one in Lorraine's house, with a massive cast-iron stove that could hold a dozen pots at once, long counters scarred with years of use, and shelves stocked with enough supplies to feed an army. Ethan stood near the stove, watching her take it all in. "The pantry's through there," he said, gesturing to a door on the left. "Root cellar's outside, around back. We get supplies delivered from town every 2 weeks. Flour, sugar, coffee, basics. Everything else we raise or trade for." Clara moved through the space, her fingers trailing over surfaces, opening cabinets, taking inventory. Pots, pans, mixing bowls, utensils. Everything she needed and more. This was a kitchen built for serious work, for feeding men who burn thousands of calories a day in hard labor. "It's wonderful," she said honestly. "It's yours now." Ethan pulled out his pocket watch and checked the time. 11:30. "The men will be coming in for lunch at noon. Think you can manage something in 30 minutes? Clara's pulse quickened. 30 minutes. A dozen men, first meal, first impression. "Yes," she said, more confidently than she felt. Ethan's mouth quirked slightly,
not quite a smile, but close. "I'll leave you to it. Ring the bell when it's ready." He pointed to a large bell mounted on the wall near the door. "They'll hear it from anywhere on the property." Then he was gone, and Clara was alone in the kitchen with 28 minutes and a reputation to build. She moved fast, falling into the rhythm that her father had taught her. Check what's available, plan something simple but filling, execute efficiently. In the pantry, she found potatoes, onions, a basket of eggs, a wheel of hard cheese. In the cold storage, there was bacon, smoked sausage, and a crock of fresh butter. Her mind clicked through possibilities, discarding anything too fancy or time-consuming. Potato and egg scramble with sausage. Fresh biscuits if she worked fast. Coffee strong enough to wake the dead. She started the coffee first. That would take the longest. While it heated, she diced potatoes and onions, sliced the sausage, grated cheese. Her hands moved with practiced efficiency, muscle memory taking over where conscious thought might have faltered. The biscuits came together in minutes, flour, butter, buttermilk, just enough handling to bring the dough together without making it tough. She shaped them quickly and slid them into the oven, then turned her attention to the skillet. The kitchen filled with the smell of frying sausage and onions, of baking biscuits and strong coffee. Clara worked steadily, her mind focused entirely on the task. This was something she knew how to do. This was something she was good at. At exactly noon, she rang the bell. The sound echoed across the ranch, clear and commanding. Within minutes, she heard voices approaching, the stomp of boots being cleared on the porch, the rush of cold air as the door opened. 12 men filed into the kitchen, bringing with them the smell of horses and leather and honest sweat. They ranged in age from barely 20 to well past 50, all of them lean and weathered from outdoor work. They stopped when they saw Clara, surprise evident on every face. "Well, well," one of them said, a stocky man with a graying beard. "Ethan finally hired a cook." "And a pretty one at that," added a younger man with sandy hair and a quick grin. Clara felt her face flush, but kept her voice steady. "I'm Clara Whitmore. I'll be doing the cooking from now on. Food's on the table. Help yourselves." She'd set everything out family style. The scramble in a large serving bowl, biscuits in a cloth-lined basket, butter and jam in small crocks, coffee in 2 large pots. The men approached cautiously, like wild animals uncertain of a new presence in their territory. The older man with the beard served himself first, heaping his plate high. The others followed suit, filling the kitchen with the scrape of utensils and low conversation. Clara stood by the stove, hands clasped in front of her, trying not to look like she was waiting for judgment. The bearded man took his first bite of the scramble. His eyebrows rose. He took another bite, chewing thoughtfully, then looked directly at Clara. "This is good." The simple words felt like a benediction. "Thank you," Clara said. "Better than good," the sandy-haired young man added, speaking around a mouthful of biscuit. "These biscuits are light as air. Where'd Ethan find you?" "Silver Ridge." "You know how to make pie?" another man asked, this one tall and rail-thin with a scar across his left cheek. "Yes." "Fruit pie or cream pie?" "Both." The men exchanged glances, something passing between them that Clara couldn't quite read. "Name's Jack Morrison," the bearded man said, gesturing with his fork. "Foreman. That ugly bastard with the scar is Tom Fletcher." "Pleasure," Tom said dryly. "And the one stuffing his face like he's never seen food before is Danny Reeves." Danny grinned at Clara, completely unabashed. "I really haven't seen food this good before. Ethan's been poisoning us for months." "I heard that," Ethan's voice came from the doorway. He'd entered quietly, moving to pour himself coffee. "And it wasn't months, 6 weeks at most." "Felt like months," Jack muttered. The other men introduced themselves, a blur of names that Clara tried desperately to remember. Miguel, quiet and watchful. Samuel, who looked barely old enough to shave. Joseph, Carl, Patrick, James. Each one nodded or tipped his hat, and each one took seconds of the food. Clara refilled coffee, brought out more biscuits as the first batch disappeared, and tried to project confidence she didn't entirely feel. These men were her employers now, in a way. Her livelihood depended on satisfying them, on proving herself valuable enough to keep. When the meal was finished and the men began filing out to return to work, Jack lingered by the door. "You did good, Miss Whitmore," he said quietly.
Real good. We haven't had a home-cooked meal worth eating since Mary died, and that's been 2 years now. Mary? My wife. She used to do the cooking before. He cleared his throat. Anyway, welcome to the Calloway Ranch. You need anything, you let me know. After they left, Clara stood in the quiet kitchen and let out a long, shaky breath. She'd done it. First meal, first test, and she'd passed. Ethan appeared at her elbow, startling her. They liked it. They ate it anyway. Same thing, with this crew. He helped her clear the remaining dishes. Jack's right. They haven't had decent food in a long time. You'll spoil them. That's the plan, Clara said, surprised by her own boldness. Ethan's lips curved into something that was definitely a smile this time. Good plan. They worked in companionable silence, Clara washing dishes while Ethan dried. It felt strangely domestic, strangely normal, like they'd done this 100 times before, instead of being virtual strangers thrust together by circumstance. The men will expect dinner at 6, Ethan said, hanging the last plate in the rack. But you should rest this afternoon. You've had a long morning. Clara wanted to protest that she didn't need rest, that she could work all day if necessary, but exhaustion was creeping up on her now that the adrenaline of cooking had faded. The sleepless night, the emotional devastation of the morning, the terror and relief of the past few hours, it all crashed over her at once. What should I make for dinner? She asked instead.
Whatever you think is right. I trust your judgment. Ethan moved toward the door, then paused. Clara, you did well today, really well. After he left, Clara allowed herself a moment of pure, uncomplicated pride. She'd done well. She was good at this. She had value. The afternoon passed in a blur of planning and preparation. Clara explored the pantry thoroughly, taking mental inventory of what was available and what she could create. For dinner, she decided on beef stew, hearty, filling, and forgiving if she needed to keep it warm while the men finished their work. She'd make cornbread to go with it, and maybe a simple apple crisp for dessert if there was time. She worked steadily, falling into the rhythm of cooking for a crowd. Brown the meat, add the vegetables, let everything simmer together while she prepared the cornbread. The kitchen grew warm and fragrant, the windows steaming slightly from the heat of the stove. Around 4 o'clock, she heard a knock at the kitchen door. When she opened it, she found Danny Reeves standing there with an armload of firewood. Ethan said to bring this to your cabin, he said, his boyish face friendly. Mind if I stack it inside? Save you the trouble of hauling it yourself. That's very kind, thank you. She walked with him to the cabin, watching as he efficiently stacked the wood near the fireplace. He couldn't have been more than 22 or 23, with an open, earnest expression that reminded her of Tommy Fletcher. How long have you worked here? Clara asked. 3 years come spring. Ethan hired me when I was just 18. Nobody else would take a chance on me. Danny brushed bark dust from his hands. This is a good place to work. Ethan's fair, pays on time, doesn't ask more than a man can give. And now we've got decent food again, so that's even better. What happened to the previous cook? Jack mentioned someone named Mary? Danny's expression sobered. Mary Morrison, Jack's wife. She did all the cooking and cleaning, made this place feel like a home instead of just a work camp. When she passed from pneumonia 2 years back, Jack took it real hard. Couldn't bear to have anyone else in that kitchen for a long while. He straightened up, surveying his work. Ethan tried to do the cooking himself rather than upset Jack by hiring someone new. Finally wore Jack down. We were all threatening mutiny over those beans. Clara smiled despite herself. The beans were that bad? You have no idea. Danny headed for the door, then turned back. I'm glad you're here, Miss Whitmore. This place needed, I don't know, something softer, I guess. Something that remembers there's more to life than work and sleep and work again. After he left, Clara sat in her cabin and thought about Mary Morrison, a woman she'd never met who'd made this rough place feel like home. That was what Clara needed to do now, not replace Mary, but create her own version of home for these men who worked themselves to exhaustion day after day. She could do this. She would do this. At 6 o'clock sharp, she rang the dinner bell. The men came in hungry and tired, their faces drawn from a long day of winter work. But when they saw the table laden with steaming stew, golden cornbread, and the apple crisp cooling on the counter, something in the atmosphere shifted. Is that dessert? Samuel asked, his young voice cracking slightly with excitement. Apple crisp, Clara confirmed. If you finish your dinner. The men attacked the meal with the enthusiasm of people who'd been surviving rather than enjoying food for too long. Clara watched the meat, feeling a deep satisfaction that had nothing to do with ego and everything to do with purpose. She was feeding them. She was taking care of them. She was making their hard lives a little bit easier, a little bit warmer. Miss Whitmore, Jack said, pushing back his empty bowl. I need to say something. The table fell quiet. Mary used to make apple crisp every Sunday, Jack continued, his voice rough with emotion. It was her specialty. I haven't had it since she died because I couldn't bear to taste it and remember. He looked at Clara directly. But this honors her memory instead of hurting it, and I think she'd be glad to know someone's feeding these fools properly again. Clara's throat tightened. Thank you, Jack. That means more than you know. Means you're not going anywhere, Tom Fletcher said firmly. We're keeping you. The other men murmured agreement, and Clara felt something warm and unfamiliar settle in her chest. Belonging. Not the forced, uncomfortable belonging of Lorraine's house, but real belonging earned through work and respect. After dinner, as she cleaned up and the men dispersed to their evening routines, Ethan appeared again. They're already half in love with you, he said, leaning against the counter. Danny told me you're a miracle worker. Samuel said you're an angel. Tom said, and I quote, if you let this one get away, boss, I'm leaving and taking her with me. Clara laughed, surprised by the sound. I made stew and cornbread, hardly miraculous. You made them remember what it feels like to be taken care of. That's more valuable than you know. Ethan's expression grew serious. I meant what I said this morning. This isn't charity, Clara. You're earning your keep and then some. But I want you to understand, you're safe here. No one will mock you or belittle you or make you feel like you don't matter. Not on my land. Why are you being so kind to me? The question escaped before Clara could stop it. You didn't even know me yesterday. Ethan was quiet for a long moment, his eyes distant. My mother died when I was 14. My father remarried within 6 months, a woman who made it very clear that I was in the way of her plans for this ranch. She tried to convince my father to send me east to school, to get me out from underfoot. He met Clara's eyes. My father refused, but I never forgot how it felt to be treated like an inconvenience in my own home. To have someone look at you and see only a problem to be solved. I'm sorry. Don't be. It taught me something important, that how people treat others when they have power tells you everything you need to know about their character. He straightened up from the counter. Last night, I watched you bring joy to children who needed it, and I watched those women destroy you for it. That told me everything I needed to know about both sides. Clara didn't know what to say to that, so she simply nodded. Get some rest, Ethan said. Tomorrow will be another long day. But Clara didn't rest. She lay in her narrow bed in her small cabin, wrapped in a quilt made by a dead woman's hands, and stared at the ceiling. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw Margaret Winter's cruel smile, heard Lorraine's cold voice ordering her out of the house. She'd escaped. She had work and shelter and safety. But Silver Ridge was only 2 hours away. Lorraine was only 2 hours away. And Clara couldn't shake the feeling that this reprieve was temporary, that somehow, some way, it would all come crashing down. The days fell into a rhythm. Clara rose before dawn to start breakfast, fed the men at 6, cleaned the kitchen, prepared lunch. The afternoon she spent planning dinners and experimenting with the ranch's supplies. She baked bread, tried new stew combinations, made pies that disappeared almost before they cooled. The men began to relax around her, their initial caution giving way to easy conversation. They told her about their lives, their families back east or down south, the dreams that had brought them to Colorado Territory and the realities that had kept them here. In return, Clara found herself sharing small pieces of her own story, her father's recipes, her love of baking, carefully edited versions of her life that omitted Lorraine's cruelty and her own desperate loneliness. Ethan was a constant presence, but never intrusive. He helped with dishes, brought her supplies from town, made sure the cabin stayed warm and comfortable. They developed an easy partnership that felt natural, unforced. But beneath the surface of this new life, Clara remained tense, waiting for the other shoe to drop. It dropped 3 weeks after she arrived. Clara was in the kitchen, elbow deep in bread dough, when she heard horses approaching. Not the familiar sound of the ranch hands returning from the fields, but something different, official, purposeful. She wiped her hands on her apron and moved to the window. 3 riders were approaching the main house. Sheriff Robert Daniels, Mayor Henry Winters, and trailing slightly behind them, looking pleased with herself, was Margaret Winters. Claire's blood turned to ice. Ethan emerged from the barn, his expression wary as he watched the riders approach. The sheriff dismounted first, his hand resting on his gun belt, not threatening, but present. "Ethan," Sheriff Daniels said, his voice carrying through the cold air, "we need to have a conversation." Claire's hands trembled as she untied her apron. She knew, somehow, that this was about her, that Lorraine or Margaret or both had found a way to reach her even here, even in this safe place she'd foolishly allowed herself to believe in. She stepped out onto the porch as the sheriff began speaking to Ethan in low tones. All 4 of them turned to look at her, the sheriff grave, the mayor uncomfortable, Margaret triumphant. "Clara Whitmore," Sheriff Daniels called out. "I need you to come with me, please." "On what grounds?" Ethan's voice was hard as stone. The sheriff pulled a folded paper from his coat. "Formal complaint filed by Lorraine Whitmore. Allegations of moral misconduct and living in an improper arrangement." Clara couldn't breathe. Moral misconduct. The words hung in the air like an accusation, like poison. "That's absurd," Ethan said flatly. "Maybe so," the sheriff agreed. "But the complaint's been filed, and it's my job to investigate. Miss Whitmore needs to come to town to answer questions." "She's my employee," Ethan protested. "She works for me, same as any ranch hand. There's nothing improper about it." Margaret Winters urged her horse forward, her smile sharp. A single woman living alone on a bachelor's property, cooking his meals, cleaning his house, residing in a private cabin away from town supervision? "Mr. Calloway, even you must see how this appears."
"It appears like honest work," Ethan shot back. "To you, perhaps. Others might draw different conclusions."
Margaret's eyes found Clara's. Poor Clara. First she embarrasses herself at the Christmas celebration, then she takes up residence here under such questionable circumstances. Lorraine is beside herself with worry about her stepdaughter's reputation. The lie was so blatant, so shameless, that Clara felt rage override her fear. "Lorraine threw me out," she said, her voice steady and clear. "On Christmas morning. She told me she never wanted to see me again." "That's your story," Margaret replied smoothly. "Lorraine tells it quite differently. She says you ran away in a fit of childish temper and she's been desperately trying to locate you." "That's not true." "Then come to town and explain that to the proper authorities," Sheriff Daniels said, not unkindly. "I'm not accusing you of anything, Miss Whitmore, but questions have been raised and they need to be answered in an official capacity." Ethan stepped between Clara and the sheriff. "She's not going anywhere without legal representation." "She's not under arrest," the sheriff clarified. "I'm just asking her to come answer questions." "And if she refuses?" The sheriff's expression hardened slightly. "Then I'll have to insist more formally. Don't make this difficult, Ethan. I'm trying to handle this quietly." The ranch hands had gathered now, drawn by the sound of horses and raised voices. Jack stood at the front of the group, his face dark with anger. Tom Fletcher's hand rested on the knife at his belt. Danny looked between Clara and Ethan with desperate concern. "What's the charge?" Jack demanded. "No charge yet," the sheriff said. "Just questions." "Questions that will turn into charges," Ethan countered. "Questions designed to ruin her reputation whether she's guilty of anything or not." He turned to the mayor. "Henry, you know this is political. Your wife has been gunning for this woman since the Christmas celebration." Mayor Winters shifted uncomfortably in his saddle. "Robert is just doing his job, Ethan. If Miss Whitmore has nothing to hide, she has nothing to fear." "That's naive, and you know it." Margaret's smile widened. "Mr. Calloway, your passionate defense of Miss Whitmore is quite touching, almost as if you have a personal stake in protecting her reputation. One might almost think—" "Choose your next words very carefully," Ethan interrupted, his voice dangerously quiet. The sheriff held up both hands. "Everyone calm down. This doesn't need to escalate." He looked at Clara. "Miss Whitmore, will you come voluntarily? I give you my word you'll be treated fairly." Clara looked at Ethan, at the ranch hands, at this place that had become the closest thing to home she'd known since her father died. Then she looked at Margaret Winters' smug face and understood with perfect clarity what was happening. This wasn't about morality or propriety. This was revenge. This was Margaret punishing Clara for making her look foolish, for being defended by Ethan when she should have been humiliated. This was Lorraine ensuring that Clara remained powerless, that even in exile she could be controlled. And if Clara ran, if she fought, if she made this difficult, she would only prove them right in the eyes of the law. "I'll come," she said quietly. "Clara," Ethan started. "I'll come," she repeated more firmly, "because I haven't done anything wrong, and I'm not going to act like I have." She walked down the porch steps, her head high despite the fear coursing through her veins. The sheriff dismounted and moved to help her onto his horse, but Ethan got there first. "I'm coming with her," he said flatly. "That's not— I'm coming," Ethan repeated in a tone that brooked no argument. "She's my employee. I have a right to ensure she's treated fairly." The sheriff considered this, then nodded. "Fine, but you stay out of the actual questioning." Ethan helped Clara onto the sheriff's horse, his hand steady on her waist. Then he mounted his own horse and positioned himself beside her, a silent guardian. As they rode away from the ranch, Clara looked back one last time. The men stood in a tight group, watching her go with expressions ranging from anger to helplessness. Jack raised one hand in a gesture that might have been farewell or promise. Then the ranch disappeared behind a rise, and Clara was alone again with her fear and her memories of other times when people in power had decided she didn't deserve dignity. The ride to Silver Ridge felt like a funeral procession. The Silver Ridge jail consisted of 2 cells in the back of the sheriff's office, separated from the main room by a heavy wooden door with iron reinforcements. Clara had walked past this building 100 times in her life and never imagined she'd see the inside of it. Sheriff Daniels led her through that door with an apologetic expression that did nothing to ease the knot of terror in her stomach. "It's just until we can hold a proper hearing," he said, unlocking the first cell. "Tomorrow morning, most likely. Judge Morrison is in town for the week." "You're actually putting her in a cell?" Ethan's voice was low and dangerous. He'd followed them inside despite the sheriff's protests, and now he stood in the doorway like a barrier between Clara and the rest of the world. "It's procedure, Ethan. A formal complaint has been filed. Until it's resolved, she needs to remain in custody." The sheriff at least had the decency to look uncomfortable. "I don't like it any more than you do, but the law is the law." Clara stepped into the cell before Ethan could argue further. The space was small and cold, containing only a narrow cot with a thin blanket and a chamber pot in the corner. The walls were bare stone, and the single window was too high and too small to provide much light. "I'll be fine," she said, though her voice shook slightly. "Really?" The cell door clanged shut with a finality that made Clara's chest tighten. The sheriff locked it and hung the key on a peg near his desk, then turned to Ethan. "You can't stay here all night. Watch me. Ethan, I'm not leaving her alone in this place." Ethan pulled a chair from the main office and positioned it just outside the cell, close enough that Clara could see his face through the bars. "You have a problem with that, Robert. You can try to make me leave. But I promise you that conversation won't end well." The sheriff studied him for a long moment, then sighed. "Fine. But you stay quiet and out of the way. I've got paperwork to do." Margaret Winters had disappeared shortly after they arrived in town, no doubt spreading the news of Clara's arrest to anyone who would listen. Mayor Winters had followed his wife, leaving the sheriff to handle the situation alone. Now, as evening settled over Silver Ridge, the office grew quiet except for the scratch of the sheriff's pen and the occasional crackle from the wood stove in the corner. Clara sat on the edge of the cot, her hands folded in her lap, trying not to cry. She'd been so careful. She'd worked hard, kept her head down, tried to build something honest and good at the ranch. And still, they'd found a way to tear it all down. "This is my fault," she whispered. Ethan leaned forward in his chair. "How do you figure that?" "I should have known better than to accept your offer. Should have known Lorraine wouldn't just let me disappear quietly." Clara's hands twisted together. "Now I've brought trouble to your ranch, to you. The men will suffer because they're without a cook, and you'll have to deal with questions about your character, and all because I—" "Stop." Ethan's voice was firm but gentle. "None of this is your fault. You committed no crime. You've done nothing wrong. The law doesn't care about that. You said so yourself."
Clara looked at him through the bars, this man who'd shown her more kindness in 3 weeks than her own family had in 3 years. They'll twist everything, make it sound sordid and improper. By the time they're done, my reputation will be destroyed and yours will be damaged just for associating with me. Let them try. Ethan's jaw was set, his eyes hard. I've built my reputation on honest dealing and fair treatment. One vindictive woman's accusations won't change what people know about me. You don't understand how this works, Clara said, her voice breaking slightly. It doesn't matter what's true.
It only matters what people believe, and people always believe the worst. The sheriff cleared his throat from his desk. For what it's worth, Miss Whitmore, I don't believe you've done anything improper. I've known Ethan since we were boys, and he's not the kind of man who would take advantage of a woman in difficult circumstances. Then why are you keeping her locked up? Ethan demanded. Because Mayor Winters insisted on it, and he's my boss. The sheriff set down his pen. Look, I don't like this any more than you do, but Lorraine Whitmore filed a formal complaint with specific allegations. I have to investigate. That's my job. What exactly are the allegations? Clara asked. The sheriff hesitated, then pulled out a folded document from his desk drawer. According to Mrs. Whitmore, you left her home without permission on Christmas morning, taking items that didn't belong to you. She claims you've been living in an immoral arrangement with Mr. Calloway, and that your presence on his ranch constitutes both a moral danger to yourself and a scandal to the community. Each word hit Clara like a physical blow. I didn't steal anything. Everything I took belonged to me, my clothes, my father's recipe book. The recipe book is specifically mentioned, the sheriff interrupted, consulting the document. Mrs. Whitmore claims it was your father's property, which became hers upon his death, and that you had no right to remove it from the house. That's insane, Clara shot to her feet, gripping the bars. My father gave me that book when I was 12 years old. He wrote notes in it specifically for me, teaching me each recipe. It was always mine. Do you have proof of that? The question stopped Clara cold. Proof. How did you prove ownership of something given in love, passed down through teaching and trust? The recipe book had her father's handwriting, yes, but it also had Lorraine's legal claim as his widow. No, she whispered. I don't have proof. Then it's her word against yours. The sheriff looked genuinely sympathetic. I'm sorry, Miss Whitmore, but without evidence to the contrary, the law sides with the legal widow. Ethan stood abruptly, his chair scraping against the floor. This is ridiculous, Robert. You know what this is really about. Margaret Winters wants revenge for being embarrassed at the Christmas celebration, and Lorraine wants to maintain control over her stepdaughter. They're using the law to settle personal grudges. Maybe so, the sheriff agreed, but I still have to follow procedure. The hearing tomorrow will sort everything out. Will it? Ethan's voice was bitter. Judge Morrison is Margaret's cousin. You think he'll be impartial? The sheriff's silence was answer enough. Clara sank back onto the cot, feeling the weight of inevitability pressing down on her. They'd planned this carefully, filed the complaint, ensured the right judge would hear the case, created a situation where the truth didn't matter nearly as much as social pressure and legal technicalities. She was going to lose. Again. I should never have left the house, she said quietly, more to herself than anyone else. I should have just endured it. Stayed small and quiet and grateful for whatever scraps of dignity Lorraine allowed me. At least then I'd still have a place to sleep that wasn't a jail cell. Listen to me. Ethan crouched down outside the bars, bringing himself to eye level with her. You're not going to lose, and you're not going back to that house. Whatever happens at this hearing, we'll figure it out. Together. Why? The question burst out of Clara with more force than she'd intended. Why are you doing this? You barely know me. You've known me for 3 weeks, and now you're risking your reputation. You're standing in this community for someone who's brought you nothing but trouble. Ethan was quiet for a long moment, his eyes searching her face. When he spoke, his voice was low and earnest. Do you remember what I said that night at the Christmas celebration? About your cookies tasting like home? Clara nodded. I meant that. Not because they reminded me of my own home, but because they represented something I've been missing for a long time. He leaned closer to the bars. This ranch, everything I've built, it's successful. It's profitable. But it's not a home. It's a business, a well-run operation where men come to work and earn wages and leave again when something better comes along. There's no warmth to it, no heart. I don't understand what that has to do with—
You brought heart back, Ethan interrupted gently. In 3 weeks, you've turned that kitchen into the center of the ranch. The men linger after meals now, talking and laughing instead of rushing back to work.
They look forward to coming in from the cold because they know there'll be hot coffee and good food and someone who cares whether they're eating properly. You did that, Clara. You made a workplace feel like a home. Clara felt tears pricking at her eyes. That doesn't change the fact that I'm in a jail cell. No, it doesn't, but it changes everything else. Ethan reached through the bars, his hand extended palm up in invitation. It means you're not alone. It means you're not fighting this battle by yourself. And it means that no matter what happens tomorrow, you'll always have a place at the Calloway Ranch if you want it. Clara looked at his outstretched hand for a long moment, then slowly placed her own hand in his. His fingers closed around hers, warm and solid and real. "Thank you," she whispered. They sat like that as darkness fell completely outside, as the sheriff lit lamps and eventually dozed at his desk. Ethan never let go of her hand, and Clara found herself drawing strength from that simple contact, from the knowledge that someone was choosing to stand beside her when it would be so much easier to walk away. Sometime near midnight, she finally fell into an uneasy sleep, still sitting upright on the cot. When she woke just before dawn, stiff and cold and disoriented, Ethan was still there. He'd pulled his chair as close to the bars as possible and had fallen asleep sitting up, his hat tipped over his eyes. The sight of him made something crack open in Clara's chest, not breaking, but opening, like a door she'd kept locked for so long she'd forgotten what it felt like to let light in. The sheriff arrived at 7, bringing with him 2 tin cups of weak coffee and the news that the hearing would begin at 9 o'clock in the town hall. "Judge Morrison is already at the hotel," he said, unlocking Clara's cell. "Mrs. Whitmore and Mrs. Winters arrived early this morning. Apparently this has become quite the event." "Wonderful," Ethan muttered, accepting his coffee. Nothing like public humiliation before breakfast. Clara's hands shook as she tried to smooth her dress. She'd slept in her clothes, and now she looked rumpled and disheveled. Exactly the kind of appearance that would reinforce every negative assumption people already had about her. "Can I at least wash my face?" she asked. The sheriff nodded. "There's a basin in the back room. Take your time." The back room was barely more than a closet, but it had a wash basin with clean water and a small, cracked mirror. Clara stared at her reflection, pale skin, dark circles under her eyes, hair coming loose from its pins. She looked exactly like what she was, a woman at the end of her rope. But she wasn't at the end, not yet. Clara washed her face with cold water, repinned her hair as neatly as she could manage, and tried to summon whatever dignity she had left. When she emerged from the back room, Ethan was waiting with a fresh piece of bread he'd convinced the sheriff to procure from the bakery. "Eat," he ordered gently. "You'll need your strength." The bread tasted like sawdust in her mouth, but Clara forced it down. Ethan was right. She needed to be sharp for whatever was coming. At 8:45, they walked to the town hall together. The same building where Clara had been humiliated 3 weeks earlier was now going to serve as the venue for her trial. The symmetry was almost poetic. A crowd had already gathered outside, townsfolk who'd heard about the hearing and wanted to witness the spectacle. Clara recognized faces from the Christmas celebration, people who'd laughed or looked away or whispered behind their hands. Now they watched her approach with undisguised curiosity, their eyes tracking her every movement like vultures waiting for something to die. "Ignore them," Ethan murmured, his hand at the small of her back, guiding her through the crowd. Inside, the hall had been arranged like a courtroom. A long table at the front served as the judge's bench. Rows of chairs faced it, already half filled with spectators. On the left side sat Lorraine Whitmore and Margaret Winters, both dressed in their finest clothes, looking for all the world like they were attending a social event rather than attempting to destroy someone's life. Judge Morrison was a severe-looking man in his late 50s with steel gray hair and the kind of face that had forgotten how to smile decades ago. He sat at the front table reviewing papers with an expression of profound boredom. Sheriff Daniels directed Clara and Ethan to seats on the right side of the room. then took his own position near the judge's table. The murmur of conversation died down as Judge Morrison looked up from his papers and surveyed the assembled crowd. This is an informal hearing to address allegations of improper conduct filed by Mrs. Lorraine Whitmore against Miss Clara Whitmore, he announced, his voice carrying easily through the hall. This is not a criminal trial, but the findings may result in legal action if warranted. We will proceed with testimony from the complainant, followed by the accused's defense. He gestured to Lorraine. Mrs. Whitmore, please present your case. Lorraine stood with practiced grace, every inch the respectable widow wronged by an ungrateful stepdaughter. She moved to stand before the judge, her hands clasped demurely in front of her. Your Honor, it pains me to bring this matter before you, but I feel I have no choice. Her voice carried the perfect blend of sorrow and duty. My late husband, Marcus Whitmore, entrusted me with the care of his daughter when he passed 3 years ago. I have done my best to provide for Clara, to give her a stable home and proper guidance despite the considerable expense and inconvenience. Clara's nails dug into her palms. Expense. Inconvenience. As if 3 years of unpaid labor meant nothing. On Christmas morning, Lorraine continued, after a regrettable incident at the town celebration the previous evening, Clara chose to leave my home without permission. She took with her several items of value, including a recipe book that rightfully belongs to me as my late husband's heir. The recipe book was mine, Clara said before she could stop herself. My father gave it to... Judge Morrison's gavel came down hard. You will have your opportunity to speak, Miss Whitmore. Until then, you will remain silent. Clara subsided, her cheeks burning. Lorraine's expression remained sorrowful and patient, as if Clara's outburst only proved her point. As I was saying, Clara disappeared on Christmas morning. I was naturally distraught, fearing for her safety and well-being. It wasn't until days later that I learned she had taken up residence at the Calloway Ranch, living in a private cabin in an arrangement that can only be described as highly inappropriate for an unmarried woman. Mrs. Whitmore works as my ranch cook, Ethan interjected. There's nothing inappropriate about... The gavel came down again. Mr. Calloway, you are not a party to these proceedings. One more interruption and I'll have you removed from this hall. Ethan's jaw clenched, but he fell silent. Lorraine continued, painting a picture of Clara as an ungrateful, impulsive girl who'd fled responsibility and propriety to live in sin with a wealthy rancher. She described the Christmas celebration incident with strategic edits, making it sound as though Clara had caused a scene and embarrassed the family through her own dramatic behavior. I tried to overlook her eccentricities, Lorraine said, her voice breaking slightly, her childish interests, her inability to function in polite society. But when she chose to abandon her home and her family to live in circumstances that can only damage her reputation, and by extension, mine, I knew I had to act, for her own good, if nothing else. It was a masterful performance. Lorraine positioned herself as the long-suffering stepmother, driven to desperate measures by a stepdaughter who refused to be helped. Around the room, Clara could see heads nodding, expressions of sympathy directed at Lorraine. What remedy do you seek? Judge Morrison asked. I want Clara returned to my custody, where I can ensure she receives proper supervision and guidance. I also want the return of my late husband's recipe book and any other property she removed from my home. Lorraine's eyes found Clara's across the room. Additionally, I believe Mr. Calloway should face consequences for harboring a young woman in such questionable circumstances. At minimum, a fine. Perhaps more serious charges if an investigation reveals the true nature of their arrangement. The crowd stirred at this, whispers spreading like wildfire. Clara felt sick. They were going to make Ethan pay for his kindness, going to punish him for offering her shelter when she had nowhere else to go. Very well, Judge Morrison said, making notes. Mrs. Winters, you filed a supporting statement. Do you have anything to add? Margaret Winters rose, her expression grave. Only that I witnessed Miss Whitmore's behavior at the Christmas celebration. Her display was attention-seeking and inappropriate. When Mr. Calloway defended her, quite gallantly, I'll admit, it created the appearance of an attachment between them that has since been confirmed by their living arrangement. I believe this was calculated on Miss Whitmore's part, a deliberate attempt to ensnare a wealthy man by playing on his sympathies. The accusation was so outrageous that Clara actually gasped aloud. But Margaret's delivery was perfect, concerned, reluctant. The observation of someone who hated to speak ill but felt duty-bound to tell the truth. Judge Morrison turned to Clara. "Miss Whitmore, you may now present your defense." Clara stood on shaking legs. Every eye in the room was on her, most of them already convinced of her guilt. She opened her mouth, but no words came out. How did you defend yourself against lies wrapped in just enough truth to sound plausible? How did you explain that you'd been thrown out of your home on Christmas morning when the woman who'd done it sat right there, playing the role of concerned guardian? How did you prove your innocence when the very fact of your poverty and homelessness was being used as evidence of moral failing? Clara's voice came out as barely a whisper. She cleared her throat and tried again. "I didn't steal anything. Everything I took belonged to me. My father gave me that recipe book when I was 12 years old. He taught me every recipe in it, wrote notes in the margins specifically for me. It was always mine." "Do you have any proof of this claim?" Judge Morrison asked. "No, Your Honor, but if you look at the book, you'll see his handwriting, his notes to me by name. Notes to Clara could refer to either you or Mrs. Whitmore, whose legal name is also Clara." The judge consulted his papers. "Clara Lorraine Whitmore, married to Marcus Whitmore in 1872. Clara's stomach dropped. She'd forgotten that Lorraine's first name was also Clara, a coincidence that had always seemed meaningless until now. "As for the circumstances of your departure," the judge continued, "Mrs. Whitmore states you left of your own accord. You claim you were forced out. Without witnesses to support either version, I'm inclined to credit the account of the legal property owner." "She told me to pack my things and be gone by morning," Clara said desperately. "She said she wanted me out of her house, out of her life. I had nowhere to go, no money, nothing. Mr. Calloway offered me honest work. Honest work that involves living alone on his property in a private cabin?" Judge Morrison's eyebrows rose. "Surely you understand how that appears, Miss Whitmore." "It appears like employment," Clara's voice rose. "I cook 3 meals a day for 12 men. I clean the kitchen. I do the work I was hired to do, nothing more. Mr. Calloway has been nothing but respectful and proper. Yet you sleep in a cabin he provides, wear clothes he presumably pays for, eat food from his stores." The judge shook his head. "Miss Whitmore, I don't doubt that you believe your arrangement is innocent, but perception matters. The appearance of impropriety is nearly as damaging as actual impropriety, particularly for a young, unmarried woman." "So I should have stayed with Lorraine?" Clara demanded. "Should have accepted being thrown out on Christmas morning, sleeping in the street, starving, because accepting help from a kind man might appear improper?" "You should have sought proper employment through proper channels," the judge said sternly. "A position in town, perhaps. Domestic work in a family home where there would be appropriate supervision. Instead, you chose to isolate yourself with a bachelor rancher in circumstances that invite speculation and scandal." Clara looked around the room, at all the faces watching her with judgment or pity or satisfaction. She looked at Lorraine, whose expression remained carefully neutral. She looked at Margaret Winters, who couldn't quite hide her smile, and she understood that the fix was in. The decision had been made before she'd even entered the room. This hearing was just theater, a formality to give the appearance of justice while delivering a predetermined verdict. "I didn't have proper channels," Clara said, her voice flat with defeat. "I had 1 hour to leave the only home I'd ever known. I had $11 to my name and nowhere to go. Mr. Calloway offered me dignity when everyone else offered me nothing. If that's a crime, then I'm guilty." "Miss Whitmore, but I'm not going back." Clara lifted her chin, found some final reserve of courage she didn't know she possessed. "You can't force me to return to Lorraine's house. I'm 26 years old, a legal adult. I may have to forfeit my father's recipe book, may have to accept whatever judgment you impose. But I will not go back to living as an unwanted guest in a house that was never truly my home." Judge Morrison's expression hardened. "You will go where this court determines is appropriate for your welfare and the community's moral standards." "Then put me in jail," Clara said recklessly. "Lock me up for the crime of accepting honest work. At least in a cell, I won't have to pretend gratitude for cruelty disguised as charity." The room erupted in shocked whispers.
Lorraine stood, her face flushed with anger, barely concealed beneath a mask of concern.
You see, Your Honor, this is exactly the kind of unstable, dramatic behavior I've been dealing with for 3 years. Clara needs proper supervision before she destroys what little reputation she has left. I have no reputation left to destroy, Clara's voice cracked. You all made sure of that the night of the Christmas celebration. You laughed at me, mocked me, threw my father's cookies in the trash like they were garbage. You made it clear I had no value, no place, no worth. Well, congratulations. You were right. I'm worthless in your eyes, and nothing I do will ever change that. Clara? Ethan's voice cut through her spiral, steady and calm. Stop. She turned to look at him. He'd stood up, was watching her with an expression she couldn't quite read. That's enough, he said quietly. You don't need to defend yourself anymore. But trust me. He turned to face Judge Morrison. Your Honor, I have a proposal that will resolve this situation to everyone's satisfaction. The judge frowned. Mr. Calloway, I've already warned you about interrupting. Hear me out, Ethan interrupted. The core issue here is propriety, correct? The appearance of an unmarried woman living on my property in questionable circumstances. Among other issues, yes. Then I propose we eliminate that issue entirely. Ethan turned to Clara, and something in his eyes made her breath catch. Miss Whitmore, will you marry me? The entire room fell silent. Clara stared at him, unable to process what she'd just heard. Around them, shock rippled through the crowd like a stone thrown into still water. I beg your pardon, Judge Morrison said finally. I'm asking Miss Whitmore to be my wife, Ethan said calmly, as if he were discussing the weather. If we're married, there's no impropriety. She'll be living on the ranch as my wife, which is not only proper, but expected. This is ridiculous, Lorraine sputtered. You can't possibly. Why not? Ethan challenged. I'm a single man. She's a single woman. We're both of legal age and sound mind. I'm proposing marriage to resolve this situation in a way that satisfies all legal and moral requirements. Margaret Winters stood, her face red with fury. This is clearly a ploy to avoid consequences, a hasty marriage to circumvent legitimate concerns about what? Ethan turned to face her directly. About Clara having a place to live and work that doesn't depend on the charity of people who've made it clear she's not welcome? About her having legal protection and social standing? Those sound like solutions, not problems. Judge Morrison was studying them both with narrowed eyes. Mr. Calloway, are you genuinely proposing marriage, or is this a strategic maneuver? Does it matter? Ethan countered. The law doesn't require marriage to be motivated by love, only by mutual consent and legal capacity. We meet those requirements. Clara? The judge turned his attention to her. Do you consent to this marriage? Clara's mind was spinning. This couldn't be real. Ethan couldn't actually be proposing to her, here in this room full of people who hated her, as a legal strategy to save her from judgment. But he was looking at her with those clear, steady eyes, waiting for her answer. And Clara realized with sudden clarity that it didn't matter why he was doing it. It didn't matter if this was strategy or pity or something else entirely, because the alternative was going back to Lorraine, going back to being small and invisible and grateful for scraps. Going back to a life where she had no voice, no value, no future except whatever others decided to allow her. And she would rather die than go back to that. Yes, Clara said, her voice surprisingly steady. Yes, I'll marry you. The room exploded with noise. Shocked exclamations, angry protests, the bang of Judge Morrison's gavel trying to restore order. Through it all, Ethan held Clara's gaze, and something passed between them that felt like a promise. This is absurd. Lorraine was on her feet, her composure finally cracking. Your Honor, you can't allow this travesty. He's clearly taking advantage of a vulnerable young woman. On the contrary, Judge Morrison said slowly, I believe Mr. Calloway has found an elegant solution to a complicated problem. He looked between them. If you're both serious about this, and I mean genuinely serious, not simply using marriage as a legal shield, then I see no reason to prevent it. But the allegations, Margaret started, become moot if they marry, the judge interrupted. There's no impropriety in a wife living on her husband's property. The recipe book would arguably remain in the family. which satisfies Mrs. Lorraine Whitmore's claim to keep her late husband's possessions within the family line. And most importantly, it removes any question of Miss Clara Whitmore's moral standing. Lorraine looked like she'd been slapped. You're going to allow them to make a mockery of marriage just to avoid legitimate consequences? I'm going to allow two legal adults to make their own decisions about their future, Judge Morrison corrected. Unless you have evidence that this marriage would be invalid for some reason, evidence of coercion, perhaps, or mental incompetence? I'm not being coerced, Clara said clearly, and I'm perfectly competent to make this decision. Then I see no legal barrier. The judge made a note in his papers. Mr. Calloway, Miss Whitmore, are you prepared to proceed with this marriage immediately? Ethan glanced at Clara, a question in his eyes. She gave the barest nod. We are, Ethan confirmed. Very well. As a circuit judge, I'm authorized to perform marriages in Colorado territory. We can conduct a civil ceremony right here, right now, if you're both willing. Judge Morrison's expression was almost approving. Though I should warn you, marriage is not something to enter into lightly. Once done, it's not easily undone. We understand, Ethan said. The judge studied them for another long moment, then nodded. Then let's proceed. Mr. Calloway, Miss Whitmore, please approach the bench. Clara moved forward on legs that felt disconnected from her body. This was insane. This was the most reckless, impulsive thing she'd ever done. She was about to marry a man she'd known for 3 weeks, in a room full of people who wanted to see her humiliated, to escape charges that should never have been brought in the first place. And yet, as she stood beside Ethan before Judge Morrison, as he took her hand in his and faced the judge with that steady, unshakable calm, Clara felt something settle in her chest. Not love, not yet, but trust. Faith that this man who'd defended her twice now, who'd offered her work and shelter and now his name, would not abandon her when things got difficult. Judge Morrison opened a leather-bound book and began reading the standard marriage ceremony in a dry, perfunctory tone. The words washed over Clara like water, promises of fidelity and partnership, of staying together through prosperity and hardship, of building a life together. When the judge asked if she, Clara Ann Whitmore, took Ethan James Calloway to be her lawfully wedded husband, Clara's voice rang out clear and certain, I do. When Ethan said the same words, his voice was quieter, but no less firm. Do you have rings? The judge asked. They didn't. Clara hadn't even thought about it. But Ethan reached into his pocket and pulled out a simple gold band, worn and slightly scratched, clearly old. My father's, he said quietly, sliding it onto Clara's finger. It was too large, spinning loosely around her ring finger. We'll get it sized properly later, Judge Morrison nodded approvingly. Then, by the power vested in me by the territory of Colorado, I pronounce you husband and wife. Mr. Calloway, you may kiss your bride. Ethan turned to Clara, his eyes searching hers one final time as if asking permission. She nodded slightly, and he leaned down to press his lips to hers, a brief, chaste kiss that nonetheless felt like sealing a pact. When they pulled apart, the room had fallen into stunned silence. Congratulations, Judge Morrison said dryly. Mrs. Calloway, your change in marital status effectively nullifies all allegations in the original complaint. You're free to go. Clara, Mrs. Calloway now, stared at him. That's it? That's it. The complaint concerned an unmarried woman living improperly. You're no longer unmarried, therefore no longer living improperly. He gathered his papers. As for the recipe book, I suggest you and your stepmother work that out privately, as a family matter. But, Lorraine started. This hearing is concluded, the judge interrupted, his gavel coming down with finality. Good day. The crowd began filing out, buzzing with conversation. Clara caught fragments as they passed. Shock, speculation, a few grudging comments about Ethan's honor in making an honest woman of her. Lorraine stood frozen, her face pale with rage. Margaret Winters had already disappeared, no doubt rushing to spread the news. Sheriff Daniels approached them with an apologetic expression. I'm sorry about all this. For what it's worth, I think you did the right thing, Ethan. Thanks, Robert. Ethan shook his hand, then turned to Clara. Ready to go home? Home. The word hit Clara with unexpected force. She was going home, to her cabin, her kitchen, her life. But now it was different. Now she was married. Now she was Mrs. Calloway? Ethan's voice held a hint of concern. Are you all right? Clara realized she'd been standing there, staring at nothing, while people flowed around them. Yes, I'm fine. Just trying to process everything. I know it's a lot. He offered his arm. Come on, let's get out of here before anyone decides to offer unwanted congratulations. They walked out of the town hall together, Clara's hand resting on Ethan's arm, the two large rings spinning on her finger. The crowd outside had mostly dispersed, but enough people remained to create a gauntlet of stares and whispers as they passed. Tommy Fletcher broke free from his father's grip and ran toward them. Bumped. Miss Clara, is it true? Did you really get married? Clara knelt down to his level. I did. I'm Mrs. Calloway now. Tommy's face scrunched up in thought. Does that mean you won't make cookies anymore? Despite everything, Clara laughed. No, Tommy, I'll still make cookies, I promise. Good. He threw his arms around her neck in a fierce hug, then ran back to his father before anyone could scold him for the display. When Clara stood up again, she found Ethan watching her with an expression she couldn't quite read. What? She asked. Nothing, just, you're good with children. I like them. They're honest. Clara looked back at the town hall where Lorraine was finally emerging with a face like thunder. Should we? No, Ethan said firmly. We're done here. Let's go home. They rode back to the ranch in silence, Clara once again seated behind Ethan on his horse. But this time felt different. This time she wasn't fleeing in desperation or being escorted under guard. This time she was going home as a married woman, as someone with legal standing and protection, as someone who mattered. The sun was high in the sky when they crested the final hill and saw the ranch spread out below them. Smoke rose from the main house chimney, and Clara could see figures moving between the buildings, the ranch hands going about their work. They were going to have some explaining to do. Ethan seemed to be thinking the same thing. I should probably tell the men before they hear it from someone else. What will you say? The truth. That I asked you to marry me to protect you from Lorraine's accusations, and you said yes. He paused. Unless you want me to say something else? Clara thought about it. They could pretend it was a love match, could spin some romantic story about falling for each other over 3 weeks of shared meals and quiet conversations. But that would be a lie, and Clara was tired of lies. No, she said finally. Tell them the truth. They deserve that. When they reached the ranch, the men were gathered near the barn, clearly waiting. News must have traveled fast. Probably Danny had ridden ahead to alert them. They stood in a loose group, their expressions ranging from confusion to concern to barely suppressed curiosity. Ethan dismounted and helped Clara down, then faced his men with his characteristic directness. I expect you've heard by now that Clara and I were taken to town this morning on allegations of impropriety. Those allegations have been resolved. Clara is now my wife. The silence lasted approximately 3 seconds. Then all 12 men started talking at once. You got married? When? At the hearing? Why didn't you tell us? Is this because of those accusations? Jack Morrison's voice cut through the chaos. Quiet, all of you. He stepped forward, his weathered face serious. Ethan, are you saying you married Miss Clara to get her out of legal trouble? Yes. And Miss Clara, you agreed to this? Clara nodded. I did. Jack looked between them, then slowly nodded. Then congratulations to you both. You're a good man, Ethan Calloway, and Miss Clara, Mrs. Calloway. You've got more courage than half the men in this county. He extended his hand first to Ethan, then to Clara. Welcome to the family, officially this time. The other men followed suit, offering congratulations that were genuine if slightly confused. Only Danny hung back, his young face troubled. What's wrong, Danny? Ethan asked. Nothing's wrong exactly. It's just... Danny looked at Clara apologetically. Ma'am, I mean, no disrespect, but doesn't getting married just to avoid consequences kind of defeat the purpose? Like, won't people still talk? Let them talk, Ethan said flatly. People have been talking since Clara arrived. They'll talk no matter what we do. At least this way they can't use the law against her. But what about you?
Tom Fletcher asked quietly. You just tied yourself to a woman you barely know. That's a hell of a commitment, boss. It's a commitment I made with eyes wide open, Ethan replied, and I don't regret it. He looked at Clara as he said it, and she felt that strange flutter in her chest again. This was real. They'd actually done this. She was married to Ethan Calloway, bound to him legally and socially, for better or worse. The thought should have terrified her. Instead, it felt like solid ground under her feet for the first time in years. Well, Jack said finally, clapping his hands together, seems like this calls for a celebration. Mrs. Calloway, you feel up to making us something special for dinner? Might be nice to mark the occasion proper. Clara found herself smiling. I think I can manage that. As the men dispersed back to their work, still talking among themselves, Ethan turned to Clara. Your cabin or mine? He asked quietly. The question hung between them, loaded with implications. They were married now, which traditionally meant sharing living space, sharing a bed, but this wasn't a traditional marriage, and Clara wasn't sure what the expectations were. I don't know, she admitted. Take your cabin, Ethan said after a moment. Keep your space. Nothing has to change except the legal paperwork. Are you sure? I'm sure. He managed a small smile. I didn't marry you to take away your independence, Clara. I married you to protect it. Everything else we can figure out as we go. Clara looked at this man who'd just upended his entire life to save hers, and felt something warm and fragile take root in her heart. Thank you, she whispered, for everything. Thank me by making the men that celebration dinner they're expecting. Ethan's smile widened slightly. I have a feeling they're going to hold us to it. As he walked away toward the main house, Clara stood in the winter sunlight and let herself feel the weight of what had happened. She was married. She was safe. She was home. And for the first time since her father died, she believed those things might actually last. Clara spent the afternoon in the kitchen preparing what would become known among the ranch hands as the wedding feast, though she suspected they'd remember it more for the awkwardness than the food. Her hands moved through familiar motions, kneading dough, chopping vegetables, seasoning meat, but her mind kept circling back to the gold band on her finger, spinning loosely with every movement. She was married to Ethan Calloway, a man she'd known for 3 weeks. The absurdity of it should have paralyzed her, but instead she found herself moving with unusual clarity. Maybe it was shock. Maybe it was relief at escaping Lorraine's clutches. Or maybe, she thought as she rolled out pastry dough for an apple pie, it was simply the first time in years she'd made a choice that was entirely her own. Need any help? Clara looked up to find Jack Morrison standing in the doorway, hat in hand, looking uncharacteristically hesitant. I'm managing, thank you. Jack stepped inside anyway, closing the door against the cold. That's not really why I'm here. Clara set down her rolling pin. Then why are you here? To make sure you're all right. Jack pulled out a chair and sat heavily. That was quite a morning you had. Arrested, put on trial, married, all before noon. Most people would be falling apart. Who says I'm not falling apart? Because you're making pie. Jack gestured at the kitchen around them. Mary used to do the same thing. Whenever life got overwhelming, she'd bake. Said there was something settling about following a recipe, about knowing that if you did the steps right, you'd get the result you expected. Clara's hand stilled on the dough. I'm sorry about your wife. Danny told me a little about her. Mary was the heart of this place, Jack said quietly. When she died, the ranch kept functioning, but it stopped feeling like home. The men would eat and work and sleep, but there was no warmth to it. No one waiting with coffee when you came in from the cold, no one asking about your day or noticing when you were hurting. He looked at Clara directly. You brought that back. In 3 weeks, you did what I thought was impossible. You made this place feel alive again. I just cooked meals. You did more than that, and you know it. Jack leaned forward. Which is why I need to know. Are you really okay with what happened today? Because Ethan's a good man, one of the best I've known, but he can be single-minded when he thinks he's doing the right thing. Sometimes he doesn't stop to consider whether his solutions are what other people actually want. Clara thought about the question carefully. Was she okay with it? She'd agreed to marry Ethan to escape Lorraine's control, to avoid being forced back into a life of servitude and humiliation,
But now, in the quiet aftermath, she had to face what that agreement actually meant. "I'm scared," she admitted. "I'm terrified, actually. But I'm also relieved? Is that strange?" "Not strange at all." Ethan didn't have to do what he did. He could have let them take me back to Lorraine. It would have been easier, safer for him. Instead, Clara's voice caught. "He stood up in front of everyone and claimed me as his wife. He gave me his name, his protection, his home. And he's asking nothing in return except that I keep doing the work I was already doing." "Nothing yet," Jack said gently. "But Clara, you need to understand, this marriage might have started as a legal convenience, but it's still a marriage. People in town will have expectations. Ethan will have needs, even if he's too honorable to voice them. And you'll need to figure out what this relationship actually is and what you want it to become." "I don't know what I want it to become," Clara confessed. "I don't know him well enough to know." "Then take your time getting to know him. Ethan's patient. He'll wait." Jack stood, settling his hat back on his head. "But while you're figuring it out, remember, you're not alone anymore. You've got a husband now, whether that's in name only or something more. And you've got all of us. This ranch, these men, we're your family now. Don't forget that." After Jack left, Clara finished the pie and slid it into the oven, then stood at the window watching the ranch yard. Ethan was working with one of the horses in the corral, his movements patient and deliberate as he led the animal through its paces. Even from a distance, she could see the care he took, the quiet authority that made the skittish horse settle and trust. Was that what he'd done with her? Seen a frightened creature and decided to gentle it into the trust? The thought should have bothered her, but instead it made her curious. What kind of man looked at a homeless woman being publicly humiliated and saw someone worth defending? What kind of man married a near stranger to save her from false accusations? Clara realized she wanted to know, wanted to understand Ethan Calloway beyond the surface kindness, beyond the practical arrangement they'd entered into, wanted to know what lay beneath that calm exterior. The dinner that evening was simultaneously celebratory and strange. Clara had prepared roasted chicken with herbs, mashed potatoes with gravy, fresh bread, winter vegetables, and the apple pie that filled the kitchen with cinnamon warmth. The men ate with enthusiasm, but the conversation was stilted, everyone carefully avoiding direct mention of the marriage while simultaneously being unable to talk about anything else. Finally, Danny broke the awkward silence. "So, Mrs. Calloway, can I still call you Clara, or should I use your married name now?" "Clara is fine," she said quickly. "Please, everyone, just keep calling me Clara. Nothing needs to change." "Everything's changed, though," Samuel said quietly. The youngest ranch hand looked between Clara and Ethan with something like concern. "I mean, you're married now. That's a pretty big change." "The marriage is a legal arrangement," Ethan said firmly. "Clara remains employed as the ranch cook. She keeps her cabin, her independence, her wages. The only thing that's different is her legal status." "That's not how marriage works," Tom Fletcher pointed out. "Legally, everything Clara owns now belongs to you, Ethan. Her wages, her property, even her choices. That's the law." The words hung in the air like a threat. Clara felt her chest tighten. She'd been so focused on escaping Lorraine that she hadn't fully considered what she was walking into. Tom was right. By marrying Ethan, she'd traded one form of dependence for another. "The law can be modified by mutual agreement," Ethan said calmly. "I have no intention of exercising those rights. Clara's wages are her own. Her decisions are her own. If she wants to leave tomorrow, she's free to go." "And if you change your mind?" Clara asked, the question escaping before she could stop it. "If you decide later that you want a real wife, a real marriage, what happens to my independence then?" The men fell silent, all eyes on Ethan. He set down his fork and looked at Clara directly. "Then you'll have a choice, same as you do now, same as you'll always have while you're with me." His voice was steady, certain. "I don't want a wife who stays because she has no other option, Clara. I don't want anyone who's with me out of obligation or fear. If this arrangement stops working for you, you tell me, and we'll figure out what comes next." "You make it sound simple," Clara said, "but dissolving a marriage isn't simple. It's expensive, scandalous, nearly impossible for a woman to initiate. Then we won't dissolve it, we'll modify it." Ethan leaned back in his chair. "Marriage is what we make it, not what society dictates it should be." If we both agree this stays a practical arrangement, then that's what it is. If we both agree it should become something more, then it becomes that. But the key word is both. Always both. Miguel, who rarely spoke during meals, surprised everyone by adding, "My sister married a man who made similar promises. He was very honorable, very respectful, until he wasn't, until he decided his rights as a husband mattered more than his promises as a man." "I'm not your sister's husband," Ethan said quietly. "No," Miguel agreed, "but you are a man, and men change their minds." "So do women," Clara interjected. "So does everyone. That's the risk we both took today." She looked around the table at the concerned faces of the ranch hands. "I appreciate you all looking out for me. Truly, I do. But Ethan and I entered into this arrangement with our eyes open. Maybe it was rushed. Maybe it was unconventional. But it was our choice, and we'll live with whatever comes from it." The conversation moved on after that, turning to safer topics like the weather and cattle prices and whether the new bull they'd purchased would prove worth the investment. But Clara noticed Jack watching her with an expression of quiet approval, and when the meal ended and the men filed out, he lingered just long enough to murmur, "You're stronger than you think, Clara Calloway. Don't let anyone make you forget that." After the kitchen was clean and the men had dispersed to their evening routines, Clara found herself alone with Ethan for the first time since the ceremony. He'd stayed to help dry dishes, a habit they'd fallen into over the past 3 weeks, and now they stood in the warm kitchen with nothing left to do and everything left to say. "Your cabin or the main house?" Ethan asked, echoing his earlier question. "You said I could keep my cabin." "You can. I just thought tonight might be different. People in town will expect us to, well, spend our wedding night together. If they find out we're sleeping separately." "Let them find out," Clara said, more sharply than she intended. "I'm tired of living my life according to what people expect. That's what got me thrown in jail this morning." Ethan nodded slowly. "Fair enough. Then I'll say good night, Mrs. Calloway." He moved toward the door, but Clara's voice stopped him. "Ethan, thank you. For today. For everything. I know this wasn't what you planned when you offered me a job." "No," he agreed. "It wasn't, but I don't regret it. You might, eventually." "I might," Ethan acknowledged, "but so might you. That's the nature of taking risks." He paused with his hand on the door. "My mother used to say that the only things worth having are the things you're willing to fight for. I think she'd say you were worth fighting for, Clara. And I think she'd be right." Then he was gone, leaving Clara alone with those words echoing in the empty kitchen. She walked back to her cabin through the cold night air, the too large ring on her finger catching moonlight. Inside, everything was exactly as she'd left it that morning. Her dresses on their pegs, her father's recipe book on the table, the photograph on the mantel. The fire had burned down to coals, but someone had left fresh wood stacked by the hearth. Clara built up the fire, changed into her nightgown, and climbed into the narrow bed. She should have been exhausted. It had been the longest, strangest day of her life. Instead, she lay awake staring at the ceiling, her mind refusing to settle. She was married. She was safe. She had a home that no one could take away on a whim. So why did she feel so unsettled? The answer came slowly, like something rising from deep water. For 3 years, she'd lived in survival mode, focused entirely on getting through each day without provoking Lorraine's anger. She'd made herself small and quiet and invisible, hoping that if she just didn't cause problems, she'd be allowed to stay. Now suddenly, she was allowed to be visible, to take up space, to make choices, to matter. And she had no idea how to do any of that. The realization was terrifying and exhilarating in equal measure. Clara pulled the quilt, Ethan's mother's quilt, up to her chin and let herself imagine just for a moment what it might be like to build a real life here. Not just surviving, but actually living, making friends, creating routines. Maybe, eventually, turning this practical marriage into something genuine. The thought warmed her more than the fire did. She finally fell asleep sometime past midnight, the ring still on her finger, dreams full of possibilities she'd never allowed herself to imagine before. The next few weeks fell into a new rhythm that was both familiar and strange. Clara continued cooking for the men, continued keeping her own cabin, continued living much as she had before the marriage. But small things had changed in ways she couldn't quite define. Ethan lingered longer after meals, their conversations extending beyond practical ranch business into actual discussions about books and ideas and the world beyond Colorado territory. The men treated her with a subtle shift in deference, no longer just the cook, but the boss's wife. And people from town, when they came to the ranch on business, looked at her differently, some with grudging respect, others with thinly veiled disappointment that she'd escaped her proper punishment. Clara learned to ignore the looks. She had more important things to focus on, like the discovery that Ethan Calloway, beneath his quiet exterior, was far more interesting than she'd first realized. He read voraciously, his small bedroom in the main house lined with books on everything from cattle breeding to classical philosophy. He had opinions on literature and politics and agriculture that he rarely shared unless asked directly. And he had a dry sense of humor that emerged gradually, like sun breaking through clouds. "You're staring," Ethan said one evening, catching her watching him read by the fire in the main house. She'd started joining him there after dinner, ostensibly to mend clothes, but really because the company was pleasant. "I'm thinking," Clara corrected. "About what?" "About how little I knew about you 3 weeks ago. We got married without knowing each other's favorite colors or foods or books." Ethan closed his book, marking his place with a finger. "Blue. Anything you cook. And I'm partial to Shakespeare, though I know that's not fashionable." Clara smiled. "Green. My father's beef stew. And I've never actually read Shakespeare." "Never?" Ethan looked genuinely shocked. "Lorraine didn't approve of novels or plays. Said they gave women unrealistic expectations about life." "Then we'll have to remedy that." Ethan stood and moved to his bookshelf, selecting a worn volume. "Start with this. Much Ado About Nothing. It's funny, which makes it more accessible than the tragedies." Clara accepted the book, their fingers brushing in the exchange. The contact was brief, casual, but it sent an unexpected warmth up her arm. "Thank you," she said, her voice slightly unsteady. "You're welcome." Ethan returned to his chair, but he didn't reopen his own book. Instead, he watched her with an expression she couldn't quite read. "Clara, can I ask you something?" "Of course." "Do you ever regret it? The marriage, I mean. Do you ever wish you'd taken your chances with Judge Morrison instead of tying yourself to me?" Clara considered the question carefully. "No, but I do wonder sometimes what you get out of this arrangement. You've given me everything: safety, shelter, respect, protection. What have I given you except meals and the social inconvenience of an unconventional marriage?" "You've given this place life again," Ethan said simply. "Before you arrived, the ranch was just work. Now it feels like a home. The men are happier, more settled. There's laughter at mealtimes. The kitchen smells like cinnamon and bread instead of burnt beans, and He paused, choosing his words carefully. "I don't feel quite so alone anymore." The admission hung between them, vulnerable and honest. "I didn't realize you were lonely," Clara said softly. "Neither did I, until you showed me what it felt like not to be." Clara didn't know how to respond to that, so she opened the Shakespeare volume and began reading aloud, her voice filling the quiet room with stories of wit and romance, and people finding each other despite themselves. Ethan listened with his eyes closed, a small smile on his face, and Clara thought that maybe, just maybe, they were building something real here, something that had started as necessity but might become choice. The thaw came gradually, both in the weather and in their relationship. February gave way to early March, and the ranch began preparing for spring, the busiest season when new calves would be born and fields needed planting and every hand was needed from dawn until dark. Clara found herself taking on additional responsibilities without being asked. She started keeping track of the ranch accounts, her neat handwriting filling ledgers with income and expenses. She organized the main house, making it cleaner and more comfortable. She even began working with Jack to plan the spring planting, her knowledge of cooking herbs proving surprisingly useful for the kitchen garden. "You know," Jack said one afternoon as they marked out garden beds, "Mary used to do all this. The accounts, the organizing, the planning. Ethan's been managing alone for 2 years, and he's done well enough, but having someone to share the load makes everything easier." "I don't mind helping," Clara said. "It makes me feel useful, like I'm earning my keep." "Clara, you earned your keep the first day you arrived."
Jack straightened up, pressing a hand to his lower back. This is something more. You're not just the cook anymore. You're running this ranch alongside Ethan, whether either of you has admitted it yet. The observation stayed with Clara as she went about her work. Was Jack right? Had she transitioned from employee to partner without even realizing it? That evening, she found Ethan in the barn, checking on a pregnant mare who was close to foaling. He looked up when she entered, his face softening in the lamplight. "She'll go tonight, I think," he said, gesturing to the mare. "I'm planning to stay out here, keep watch." "Want company?" Ethan's surprise was evident. "You don't have to do that. You've already been up since before dawn." "So have you." Clara settled onto a hay bale, pulling her shawl tighter against the chill. "Besides, I've never seen a foal born. My father never owned horses, just kept them for the neighbors. It can take hours, could be boring, or it could be beautiful." Ethan smiled at that, a real smile that reached his eyes and transformed his usually serious face. "All right then. Company would be welcome." They sat in companionable silence, the barn warm with animal heat and the smell of hay. The mare paced restlessly in her stall, occasionally pausing to look back at her swollen sides with an expression that seemed to ask when this would be over. "I know how she feels," Clara murmured. "How so?" "Waiting for something inevitable to happen. Knowing change is coming, but not knowing when or how it'll feel." Ethan shifted on his hay bale to face her more directly. "Are we still talking about the horse?" Clara met his eyes. "I don't know, maybe I'm talking about us, this marriage. We're both waiting to see what it becomes, aren't we?" "I suppose we are." "Does that bother you? The uncertainty?" Ethan thought about it. "Sometimes. I'm used to making plans and following through. This situation is fluid, open-ended. It requires patience I'm not sure I have." "Patience for what?" "For you to decide if you want this to be real." The words came out quietly but firmly. "I know we started as a convenience, Clara, but somewhere along the way, at least for me, it stopped feeling convenient and started feeling—" He trailed off, searching for the right word. "Feeling what?" Clara's heart was pounding. "Like possibility," Ethan finished. "Like maybe we stumbled into something that could actually work, if we both wanted it to." Clara's breath caught. "And do you? Want it to work?" "Yes." No hesitation, no doubt. "But only if you do. Only if you choose it freely, not because you feel obligated or because you're afraid of the alternative." "I'm not afraid anymore," Clara said, surprised by the truth of it. "For the first time in years, I'm not afraid. I'm uncertain, yes. Confused sometimes, but not afraid." "That's a start." The mare suddenly went down, her breathing changing. Ethan was on his feet instantly, moving into the stall with practiced calm. Clara joined him, watching as he checked the mare and murmured encouragement. "It's starting," he said. The foaling took an hour, and Clara was mesmerized by every moment of it. The mare's struggle, the first glimpse of the foal's tiny hooves, the rush as the newborn slid into the world all wet and struggling. Ethan's hands were gentle and sure as he cleared the foal's airway, checked that everything was in order, then stepped back to let the mare do her work. Within minutes, the foal was trying to stand, all wobbly legs and determination. The mare nuzzled it encouragingly, and Clara felt tears streaming down her face. "It's beautiful," she whispered. "It always is." Ethan stood beside her, shoulder to shoulder, both of them watching new life find its footing. "No matter how many times I see it, it never gets ordinary." Clara wiped her eyes. "Thank you for letting me be here." "Thank you for staying." Ethan turned to look at her, and in the lamplight, his eyes were very dark and very serious. "Clara, I need you to know something." "What?" "I didn't marry you out of pity. I know that's what some people think, what maybe you've thought sometimes, but it wasn't pity." He took a breath. "It was recognition. When I saw you that night at the Christmas celebration, being mocked for making something beautiful, something kind, I saw someone like me. Someone who doesn't quite fit into the boxes society creates, but who keeps trying anyway. Someone who gives more than they take. Someone worth defending." "Ethan, let me finish," he said gently. "I'm not asking you to love me. I'm not even asking you to stay beyond what we agreed. But I want you to know that if you ever decide you want this marriage to be real, truly real, not just a legal arrangement, I would welcome that. Not because I need a wife to run my household or warm my bed, but because I'd like to share my life with someone who understands what it means to build something from nothing. Someone who knows that home isn't a place, it's what you create with the people you choose. Clara's heart was pounding so hard she could hear it in her ears. You're talking about choice again. Because it matters. Because you've spent too much of your life living by other people's decisions. You deserve to make your own. The foal was on its feet now, nursing from its mother with single-minded determination. New life, new beginnings, new possibilities. Clara looked at Ethan Calloway, this man who'd given her shelter and safety, and impossibly the freedom to choose her own future, and felt something shift inside her chest. Not love, not yet, but the beginnings of it. The recognition that love was possible if she was brave enough to reach for it. I need time, she said finally, to figure out what I want, who I am outside of fear and survival, to see if this feeling I have when I look at you is gratitude or something more. Take all the time you need. And if I decide I want it to be real, truly real, Ethan's smile was slow and warm. Then we'll make it real, together, but only when you're sure. They stood in the barn until the foal had drunk its fill and settled down to sleep beside its mother. Then they walked back to the main house together, not touching, but close enough that Clara could feel the warmth of Ethan beside her. At the fork where the path split, one direction to her cabin, one to the main house, they paused. "Good night, Clara," Ethan said. "Good night." But neither of them moved for a long moment, just stood there in the pre-dawn darkness, the space between them charged with unspoken possibilities. Finally, Clara turned toward her cabin. She was halfway there when she looked back to find Ethan still standing where she'd left him, watching to make sure she got home safe. The gesture was so simple, so protective, that Clara felt her heart crack open just a little bit more. She waved, and he waved back, and then she went inside and closed the door and leaned against it, breathing hard. She was falling in love with her husband. The realization should have terrified her. Instead, it felt like coming home. Over the next weeks, Clara began testing the boundaries of what they'd built. She started eating breakfast with Ethan in the main house instead of alone in her cabin. She joined the men for evening card games, her laughter mixing with theirs. She touched Ethan more. Casual touches, a hand on his arm when making a point, fingers brushing when passing plates, but touches nonetheless. And Ethan responded in kind, gradually, carefully, always letting her set the pace. He'd offer his arm when they walked. He'd save her seat beside him at the table. He'd ask her opinion on ranch decisions and actually listen to her answers. They were courting, Clara realized, doing backward what most couples did before marriage, learning each other, testing compatibility, building intimacy from the foundation of commitment rather than the promise of it. It was strange and awkward and absolutely perfect. "You're happy," Jack observed one afternoon in early April. The garden was planted now, early shoots of green beginning to push through the soil. "I haven't seen you this happy since, well, ever, I suppose, since I've only known you 3 months. Clara laughed. "I am happy. Is that strange?" "Not strange. Deserved." Jack pulled a weed from between the rows. "Ethan's happy too, in case you were wondering. Man walks around like he won the lottery. We're just figuring things out. Seems like you're figuring them out pretty well." Jack straightened up, giving her a knowing look. "Question is, when are you going to stop dancing around each other and actually have a conversation about what comes next?" Clara felt her face heat. "We talk all the time." "You talk around the big questions. When are you moving into the main house? When does this stop being a practical arrangement and start being a real marriage? When do you stop keeping one foot out the door, ready to run if things get hard?" "I'm not—" Clara started to protest, then stopped. Was she? Was she still holding back, still protecting herself, just in case? "Look," Jack said more gently, "I'm not trying to push you into anything you're not ready for. But Clara, at some point you have to decide if you're going to stay or go. For your sake and for Ethan's, you can't build a life together while you're still living like temporary roommates." The words struck Clara harder than Jack probably intended.
That night, she sat in her cabin with Shakespeare's collected works. Ethan had lent her more volumes, and she'd fallen in love with the language, and thought about what she wanted. Not what was safe or practical or expected, what she actually wanted. The answer came clearly, without hesitation. She wanted Ethan. Wanted this ranch, this life, this improbable family they'd built. Wanted to stop protecting herself and start living fully. She wanted to make her marriage real. The decision settled over her like peace, and Clara smiled. Tomorrow she'd tell him. Tomorrow she'd choose freely what had started as necessity and turned into possibility. Tomorrow she'd finally come home. But tomorrow would bring something neither of them expected. A visitor from town, a new crisis, and a test of everything they'd built together. Because in Silver Ridge, Clara was learning, peace never lasted long. Clara woke the next morning with purpose singing through her veins. Today was the day she'd tell Ethan she wanted their marriage to be real. She dressed carefully in her better dress, the deep blue one her father had bought her years ago, and pinned her hair with extra care. Her reflection in the small mirror showed a woman transformed from the frightened girl who'd arrived at the ranch 4 months ago. Her eyes were brighter, her shoulders straighter, her face no longer carrying the weight of constant fear. She looked like someone who'd found her place in the world. The kitchen was warm when she arrived, the stove already lit. Ethan must have come in early to start the fire for her, a small kindness he'd begun doing lately. Clara smiled at the thoughtfulness and set about making breakfast. Pancakes with preserved strawberries, bacon, fresh coffee. A celebration meal, though only she would know what they were celebrating. The men filed in at 6 as usual, their faces weather-worn but content. Spring had brought new energy to the ranch, and it showed in their easy laughter and quick movements. "You're glowing this morning, Mrs. Calloway," Danny said with a grin as he helped himself to pancakes. "Special occasion?" "Just a beautiful day," Clara replied, though her eyes sought Ethan's across the table. He was watching her with quiet intensity, as if he could sense something had shifted. They'd just finished eating when the sound of hoofbeats interrupted the morning peace. Multiple horses, approaching fast. The men exchanged glances. Visitors this early were never good news. Jack was first to the door, and Clara heard his sharp intake of breath. "Ethan, you better see this." Clara's stomach dropped as she followed Ethan outside. A group of riders had assembled in the ranch yard, at least 20 people, led by Mayor Winters and Sheriff Daniels. But what made Clara's blood run cold was the wagon at the center of the group, and the fragile figure sitting in it. A young woman, barely 20, with hollow eyes and a swollen belly that proclaimed her advanced pregnancy. She was dressed in little more than rags, her face bearing the shadow of old bruises. "What's the meaning of this, Henry?" Ethan demanded, his voice hard. Mayor Winters dismounted, his expression grave. "We need to have a conversation, Ethan, about the rumors coming from your ranch." "What rumors?" "That you've been harboring women here, giving them shelter, employment, protection." The mayor gestured at Clara. "Your wife was the first, of course, but we've heard there might be others. Women of questionable virtue, living here without proper supervision or oversight." Clara felt ice spread through her chest. This was an attack, carefully planned and executed. But why? And how had they known? "I have one employee who happens to be my wife," Ethan said flatly.
"There are no other women here." "Then you won't mind if we look around," Margaret Winters called from her horse. She'd positioned herself at the front of the group, her face alight with malicious triumph. "Unless you have something to hide." "You have no authority to search my property," Ethan countered. Sheriff Daniels stepped forward, looking deeply uncomfortable. "Actually, Ethan, I have a warrant. Anonymous complaint was filed claiming you're running some kind of refuge for fallen women. Judge Morrison signed the order this morning." "Anonymous complaint," Ethan repeated, his voice dripping with contempt. He looked directly at Margaret. "How convenient." "The source doesn't matter," the mayor interjected. "What matters is that Silver Ridge has standards. We can't have our community corrupted by improper establishments, even if they're disguised as charity." Clara's mind was racing. They'd known this would happen. Someone had been watching the ranch, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. But there were no other women here, so what were they? Then she saw movement at the barn.
Tom Fletcher emerged, and behind him, partially hidden in shadow, was a figure that made Clara's breath catch. A woman. Young, thin, clearly pregnant. She wore clothes that Clara recognized, one of her own dresses, altered to fit. The pieces clicked into place with horrible clarity. Someone had planted this woman here, probably sometime in the night, to provide evidence for their accusations. This was a setup, elaborate and malicious. "There!" Margaret pointed triumphantly. "I told you! He's been hiding them!" The pregnant woman looked terrified, her eyes darting between the crowd and Tom Fletcher, who stood protectively in front of her. "I can explain," Ethan started, but the mayor cut him off. "I'm sure you can, but explanations are better made in front of proper authorities." He gestured to the sheriff. "Robert, do your duty." "Ethan Calloway," Sheriff Daniels said heavily, "I'm placing you under arrest for operating an immoral establishment and harboring women of ill repute. You'll need to come with me to town." The ranch hands erupted in protest, but Ethan held up a hand for silence. His eyes found Clara's, and in them she saw not fear, but apology. "Don't fight this," he said quietly, speaking to her, though his words were meant for everyone. "I'll go peacefully. Get this sorted out in town. Jack, you're in charge until I return." "The hell you will," Jack growled. "This is a frame-up and everyone knows it." "Probably," Ethan agreed, "but resisting will only make it worse." He turned to the sheriff. "I'll come willingly, Robert, but I want your word that no one harms my wife or my men while I'm gone." "You have my word." As the sheriff moved to bind Ethan's hands, a humiliation that made Clara's chest burn with rage, she finally found her voice. "Wait!" she called out, stepping forward. "That woman! Let me speak with her." "I don't think that's appropriate," Margaret said quickly. Too quickly. "Why not?" Clara challenged. "If she's living here, surely I have a right to speak with my husband's guest." The word hung in the air, loaded with implications Clara didn't believe but needed to voice. She saw understanding flash in Ethan's eyes, followed by a slight nod. He was giving her permission to do whatever she needed to do. Clara approached the pregnant woman, who shrank back against Tom Fletcher. Up close, Clara could see she was even younger than she'd first appeared, maybe 18 at most. Her eyes held the desperate, hunted look of someone who'd known too much hardship too young. "What's your name?" Clara asked gently. The woman's eyes darted to Margaret Winters before answering. Lila James." "How long have you been here, Lila?" Since last night. A woman in town, she said there was a place that would take me in, that Mr. Calloway helped women who had nowhere else to go." "What woman?" Lila's eyes found Margaret again, then quickly looked away. "I don't know her name. She found me at the boarding house, said she'd heard about my situation, wanted to help." Clara's suspicions solidified into certainty. Margaret had orchestrated this, found a desperate pregnant woman, fed her just enough truth mixed with lies, and planted her at the ranch to create evidence for her accusations. "And your baby's father?" Clara asked, her voice still gentle. "Where is he?" Lila's face crumpled. "Gone. Left me soon as he found out. Said he wasn't ready to be a father, that I was on my own." Tears spilled down her cheeks. "I've been trying to find work, but nobody wants a pregnant woman with no husband. I've been sleeping in barns, eating whatever I can find. When that lady said there was a place that would take me in, I was so grateful I didn't ask questions." Clara's heart twisted. This girl was just another victim, used as a weapon against people trying to do right. "You were tricked," Clara said firmly. "Used to hurt good people. Do you understand that?" Lila's eyes widened with horror. "I didn't mean, I thought, I know." Clara took her hand. "You're not to blame, but now you need to tell the truth, all of it." "The truth is this girl showed up at your ranch in the middle of the night," Margaret interrupted sharply. "Whether she was invited or stumbled upon it by accident doesn't change the fact that she's here, living in questionable circumstances." "She's been here less than 12 hours, Tom Fletcher spoke up. "I found her in the barn around midnight, scared half to death and near starving. I gave her food and a safe place to sleep until morning when we could figure out what to do with her proper." "Very convenient story," the mayor said skeptically. "It's the truth." Lila's voice rose, desperate and frightened. "I was hiding in the barn because I was cold and scared, and this man," she gestured at Tom, "he found me and brought me bread and milk and a blanket. He didn't touch me, didn't hurt me, just said I could rest safe until sunrise." "And you believed him?" Margaret's voice was sharp with accusation. "A strange man finds you alone in a barn, and you just trusted him?" "He had kind eyes," Lila said simply, "and I was out of options." Clara made a decision. She turned to face the assembled crowd, drawing herself up to her full height. "You want to know what's really happening here? I'll tell you. Yes, Tom Fletcher showed this girl kindness when she needed it. Yes, my husband has created a place where people who are desperate might find safety. And yes, I suspect there will be more like Lila, people who've been cast aside by a society that values appearances over compassion." Her voice rang out clear and strong. "If that's a crime, then I'm guilty too, because given the choice between turning away someone in need and offering help, I'll choose help every single time." Spoken like someone who doesn't understand morality, Margaret sneered. "You can't just help anyone who shows up, Clara. There are proper channels, proper institutions that turn away pregnant women because they're not married," Clara challenged. "Proper channels that would rather see someone starve than risk scandal. I've lived under your version of propriety, Margaret. It nearly destroyed me." She turned to Sheriff Daniels. "You want to arrest someone? Arrest me too, because I support everything my husband has done, and I'll continue supporting it regardless of what judgments you pass."
"Clara, no," Ethan said sharply, but she ignored him. "We stand together," she said, meeting his eyes. "That's what marriage means, isn't it? For better or worse." Something shifted in Ethan's expression, surprise giving way to something deeper, warmer. "Clara, Mrs. Calloway makes an excellent point," a new voice interrupted. Everyone turned to see a well-dressed woman riding into the ranch yard, followed by 3 other riders. Clara didn't recognize her, but clearly others did. The mayor's face went pale. "Mrs. Elizabeth Hartford," he stammered. "I didn't realize you were in the territory." "Obviously." The woman dismounted with practiced grace. She was perhaps 50, with silver-streaked hair and the bearing of someone accustomed to authority. "I arrived in Silver Ridge last night and heard some very interesting rumors about this ranch. Thought I'd see for myself what all the fuss was about." "With respect, ma'am, this is a legal matter," the sheriff said. "We have a warrant." "I've seen the warrant. Judge Morrison was kind enough to show it to me this morning." Elizabeth Hartford's smile was sharp. "Interesting how quickly it was issued, given that the anonymous complaint was filed less than 24 hours ago. Almost as if someone knew exactly what they'd find here before they looked." Margaret shifted uncomfortably in her saddle. "The timing is irrelevant." "Is it? Because I find the timing quite relevant." Mrs. Hartford turned to Lila. "Child, did the woman who sent you here tell you what to say if questioned?" Lila hesitated, then nodded miserably. "She said to tell them I'd been living here for weeks, that Mr. Calloway ran a house for women like me, and that I was just one of many." "And is that true?" "No, ma'am. I only arrived last night." Mrs. Hartford turned back to the crowd. "So we have a young woman planted here deliberately with instructions to lie, in order to create evidence for accusations that are entirely fabricated. That's not law enforcement. That's a conspiracy." "Now see here," the mayor blustered. "No, you see here, Henry." Mrs. Hartford's voice cut like a blade. "I am Elizabeth Hartford, Territorial Representative for Women's Welfare and Reform. I have direct authority from the governor to investigate complaints of abuse, corruption, and miscarriage of justice. And what I'm seeing here is a textbook case of all 3. The crowd murmured with shock. Clara felt hope kindle in her chest. This woman, whoever she was, had power that even Margaret Winters couldn't dismiss. "Furthermore," Mrs. Hartford continued, "I've spent the last 12 hours speaking with people in Silver Ridge, learning about Mrs. Lorraine Whitmore's treatment of her stepdaughter, about Mrs. Margaret Winters' vendetta against that same young woman, about how a Christmas celebration turned into public humiliation, and how a desperate marriage became the only escape from false imprisonment." She turned to Clara, her expression softening. "Mrs. Calloway, I've heard your story, all of it, and I want you to know that what was done to you was not justice. It was cruelty disguised as propriety." Clara's throat tightened. "Thank you." "Don't thank me yet. I'm just getting started." Mrs. Hartford faced Ethan. "Mr. Calloway, Sheriff Daniels, release him immediately.
There are no grounds for this arrest. But the warrant, the sheriff protested weakly, is based on fabricated evidence and will be invalidated. Do it now, Robert, or I'll have you brought up on charges of false arrest. The sheriff quickly removed the bindings from Ethan's wrists. Ethan rubbed the marks, his eyes never leaving Mrs. Hartford. "Why are you helping us?" he asked bluntly. "Because someone needs to." She gestured at Lila. "This girl is 19 years old, 6 months pregnant, and has been sleeping in barns because society has decided her mistake makes her worthless. That's not morality. That's barbarism." Her gaze swept over the assembled crowd. "I've been investigating complaints about Silver Ridge for months. Stories about how this town treats anyone who doesn't fit its narrow definition of respectability. The pattern is clear, and it's shameful." "We maintain standards," Margaret started. "You maintain cruelty," Mrs. Hartford interrupted. "There's a difference between standards and sanctimony, Mrs. Winters. Your treatment of Mrs. Calloway, your harassment of Mr. Calloway, your manipulation of this poor girl, all of it demonstrates not moral superiority, but moral bankruptcy." The words landed like hammer blows. Margaret's face flushed deep red, but she couldn't seem to form a response. "Now here's what's going to happen," Mrs. Hartford announced. "Lila James will come with me to the women's shelter in Denver, where she'll receive proper care and support until her baby is born. Mr. and Mrs. Calloway will be left in peace to run their ranch however they see fit, and Judge Morrison will be receiving a formal inquiry into his conduct, particularly his pattern of bias in cases involving certain prominent families." "You can't," the mayor sputtered. "I can, and I will. I have the governor's full backing." Mrs. Hartford's smile was cold. "Unless you'd like to argue with territorial authority, I assure you that conversation will not end well for you, Henry." The mayor deflated visibly. Around him the crowd began to disperse, people suddenly finding reasons to be elsewhere. Within minutes, only Mrs. Hartford, her riders, Sheriff Daniels, and a handful of witnesses remained. "Lila," Mrs. Hartford said gently, "gather whatever belongings you have. We'll leave within the hour." "But I don't have anything," Lila said quietly. "Just the dress Mrs. Calloway lent me." Clara stepped forward. "Keep it. And wait here a moment." She hurried to her cabin and returned with a small bundle, a shawl, some undergarments, a few dollars from her own savings. "For the journey, and the baby, when it comes." Lila's eyes filled with tears. "I'm so sorry. I didn't mean to cause trouble. That woman, she made it sound like I'd be helping, like this was a good place." "It is a good place," Clara said firmly. "And you didn't cause trouble. You were used by people who wanted to hurt us. That's not your fault. Will you be all right? The baby?" "We'll be fine. Mrs. Hartford will see to that." Clara squeezed her hand. "You're going to have a chance now, Lila. A real chance. Don't waste it." After Lila and Mrs. Hartford departed, but not before the older woman pressed her card into Clara's hand with a murmured, "If you ever need anything," the ranch yard fell quiet. The men had discreetly disappeared into various work tasks, giving Clara and Ethan a moment of privacy. They stood facing each other in the morning sunlight, the weight of everything that had almost happened hanging between them. "You were ready to be arrested alongside me," Ethan said finally. "Of course I was." "Why?" Clara took a breath, feeling the words she'd planned to say that morning rearrange themselves into something more immediate, more urgent. "Because somewhere between accepting your proposal and this moment, this stopped being a marriage of convenience. It became real. At least for me." Ethan's eyes widened slightly. "Clara?" "Let me finish," she said, echoing his words from weeks ago. "I came out here this morning planning to tell you I wanted to move into the main house, that I wanted to try being a real wife, not just your cook with a ring on her finger, that I wanted to see if what I feel when I look at you might be love." She stepped closer. "And then they came to arrest you, and I realized I already know. It is love. It has been for weeks, maybe months. I was just too scared to admit it." "You're not scared anymore?" "Terrified," Clara admitted, "but not of loving you, of losing you, of going back to being alone." Ethan closed the distance between them in 2 strides, his hands coming up to frame her face. "You're not alone. You're not going back. You're staying right here, with me, for as long as you want." "What if I want forever?" "Then forever is what you'll get." He leaned down, his forehead resting against hers. Clara, I've been in love with you since the night of the Christmas celebration, since I watched you bring joy to children with cookies shaped like horses and thought that woman understands what matters. Everything since then has just been waiting for you to catch up. Clara laughed through sudden tears. I'm caught up now. Are you sure? Because there's no going back from this. If we do this, if we make this real, I need to know you're certain. I'm certain. Clara's hands came up to cover his where they rested against her cheeks. I choose this. I choose you. Not because I'm desperate or scared or have nowhere else to go, but because I want to. Because you've shown me what it means to be chosen, and I want to choose you back. Ethan kissed her then, and it was nothing like their chaste wedding kiss in front of Judge Morrison. This was deep and claiming and full of months of restrained wanting, finally set free. Clara kissed him back with equal fervor, her hands fisting in his shirt, her body pressed against his like she could merge them into one person through sheer will. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Clara found herself smiling so widely her face hurt. Move in with me, Ethan said. Today, right now. I don't want to spend another night with you in that cabin and me in the house like we're strangers instead of married. What about my things? The men will move them. They've been waiting for this almost as impatiently as I have. He grinned, looking younger and lighter than Clara had ever seen him. Jack's probably already organizing the relocation as we speak. He was right. When they walked toward the main house hand in hand, they found the ranch hands had already begun moving Clara's belongings from the cabin. Jack directed operations with the efficiency of a military commander, while Danny and Tom carried furniture and Samuel carefully transported the photograph of Clara's parents. About time, Jack said when he saw them. Thought we'd be moving these things when you were both too old to climb stairs. That's not for another 40 or 50 years at least, Ethan countered, his arm around Clara's waist. 50 if you're lucky, Jack retorted. Now get out of the way and let us work. Mrs. Calloway's moving into the main house where she belongs. Clara spent the afternoon arranging her belongings in Ethan's bedroom, their bedroom now. He'd cleared space in the wardrobe for her dresses, emptied drawers for her things, made room on the mantel for her father's photograph. Every gesture spoke of permanence, of welcome, of home. That evening, they ate dinner with the men as usual, but everything felt different. Clara sat beside Ethan at the head of the table, their hands occasionally brushing, sharing small smiles that made the ranch hands exchange knowing glances. Speech, Danny called out when the meal was finished. Boss, you gotta make a proper speech now that it's official. Ethan stood, pulling Clara up with him. All right, a speech. He looked around at the faces of his men, weathered, loyal, family. Most of you know this ranch was my father's dream. He built it from nothing, turned it into something that could sustain us all. When he died, I inherited that dream, but not the heart of it. The ranch was successful but empty. A business, not a home. His hand tightened on Clara's. Then 4 months ago, a woman showed up on Christmas morning with nowhere to go and everything to prove. She took this empty place and filled it with warmth, with laughter, with the kind of care that reminds us all why we work so hard, because we're building something worth having, something worth protecting. Clara felt tears prick her eyes. I married her to keep her safe, Ethan continued, but I'm keeping her because she makes me better, makes all of us better. This ranch isn't just a business anymore. It's a home, and it's a home because of Clara. The men erupted in cheers and applause. Jack raised his glass. To Mrs. Calloway, may she keep feeding us and keeping the boss human for many years to come. To Mrs. Calloway, the men chorused. Clara wiped her eyes, overwhelmed by the acceptance, the belonging, the sheer rightness of this moment. She looked around the table at these rough men who'd become her family, at this place that had transformed from refuge to home, at the husband beside her who'd given her everything by asking nothing in return. Thank you, she managed, all of you, for welcoming me, for protecting me, for teaching me that family isn't just blood, it's choice. You chose me, and I choose you back. That night, Clara and Ethan lay in their bed, truly theirs now, in the quiet darkness. Clara's head rested on Ethan's chest, listening to the steady rhythm of his heartbeat. Tell me about your father, she said quietly. The real story. not just the business parts. Ethan's hand stroked through her hair, the gesture gentle and soothing. He was hard. Fair, but hard. Believed in work and discipline and building something that would last. When my mother died, he threw himself into the ranch like if he just worked hard enough, the grief would fade. Did it? No. It just got buried under exhaustion. Ethan was quiet for a moment. When he remarried, I think he was looking for someone to help with the work, not to love. She wanted the ranch, not him. They made each other miserable for 5 years until he died, probably relieved to escape. Is she still alive? Somewhere back east. She left the day after the funeral, took her settlement, and disappeared. I haven't heard from her in 7 years. Clara pressed closer. I'm sorry you lost so much so young. I'm not, Ethan said, surprising her. If my life had been different, I wouldn't be here now. Wouldn't have built this ranch the way I wanted. Wouldn't have been in town that Christmas night to see a woman being mocked for making cookies shaped like horses. He tilted her face up to his. Every hard thing led me to you. I can't regret that. They made love then for the first time, and it was tender and awkward and perfect. Clara had been nervous, uncertain, but Ethan was patient, his hands gentle, his voice murmuring reassurances. When it was over, Clara lay in his arms feeling fundamentally changed, not just by the physical act, but by the emotional intimacy of it, the trust required to be that vulnerable, that open with another person. I love you, she whispered into the darkness. I love you too, Ethan replied, more than I thought possible. They fell asleep tangled together, and Clara's last thought before sleep claimed her was that she'd finally found what she'd been searching for since her father died. A place where she was wanted, not tolerated, chosen, not endured. Home. The weeks that followed established new rhythms. Clara still cooked for the men, but now she also helped Ethan with the ranch accounts, worked alongside Jack in the garden, and began teaching some of the hands to read during evening hours. The ranch thrived under their joint management, productivity increasing as morale soared. Word spread through the territory about what had happened, both the attempted frame-up and Mrs. Hartford's intervention. Some people in Silver Ridge were embarrassed, others defensive, but slowly things began to change. A few women approached Clara in town, asking quietly if the stories were true, if there really was a place that would take in people who needed help. Clara and Ethan talked about it one evening in early summer, sitting on the porch and watching the sun set over the mountains. We could do it, Ethan said thoughtfully. Make the cabin into a proper refuge. Offer temporary shelter to women who need it, help them find work, or reconnect with family. It would be controversial, Clara warned. When has that ever stopped us? Ethan smiled. Besides, we'd be doing it right this time. Properly organized with clear rules and oversight. Mrs. Hartford offered to help set it up officially. Clara thought about Lila, about her own desperate flight on Christmas morning, about all the women who found themselves trapped by circumstances beyond their control. Let's do it, she said, but slowly, carefully, one person at a time. They started with a woman named Sarah, beaten by her husband and terrified to leave. Clara gave her shelter, Ethan helped her file for legal separation, and Jack's nephew, who was a lawyer in Denver, took her case. By autumn, Sarah was living independently in town, working as a seamstress and rebuilding her life. Then came Anna, pregnant like Lila had been, abandoned by her family. She stayed at the ranch for 2 months, helping in the kitchen and garden until her baby was born. Clara was there for the birth, held Anna's hand through the pain, and wept with joy when a healthy baby girl entered the world. One by one, women came and went. Some stayed only days, others weeks or months. Each one left stronger than she'd arrived, carrying with her the knowledge that she wasn't alone, that help existed, that change was possible. The ranch became known throughout the territory, not as a house of ill repute as Margaret Winters had tried to paint it, but as a place of refuge and renewal. Mrs. Hartford made it official, designating the Callaway Ranch as a satellite shelter under her women's welfare program, providing funding and legal protection. Margaret Winters and Lorraine never apologized, but their influence in Silver Ridge waned considerably. Judge Morrison was quietly removed from his position, replaced by someone less susceptible to social pressure. And while the town never fully embraced what Clara and Ethan were doing, they stopped actively opposing it. Clara's relationship with her stepmother remained severed, and she found she didn't miss it. The recipe book, still technically Lorraine's property, Clara recreated from memory, filling a new volume with her father's recipes alongside her own innovations. It wasn't the same as having the original, but somehow it felt right. A new beginning, not just preserving the past, but building on it. 6 months after moving into the main house, Clara discovered she was pregnant. The news filled her with equal parts terror and joy. She thought of Lila and Anna and all the women who'd faced this alone and afraid, and felt grateful beyond measure that she faced it with support and love. Ethan was overjoyed, though he tried to hide his anxiety about her health. He became even more protective, insisting she rest more, work less, let others handle the heavy tasks. Clara tolerated it with amusement, knowing it came from love. Their daughter was born the following spring, on a warm April morning when the garden was beginning to bloom. The birth was hard. Clara understood now why women feared it. But when the midwife placed the tiny, squalling bundle in her arms, Clara felt her heart expand to impossible size. "She's perfect," Ethan whispered, his fingers stroking their daughter's soft cheek. "What should we name her?" Clara looked at the baby, at Ethan, at the life they'd built together from the ashes of their separate loneliness. "Hope," she said. "Her name is Hope, because that's what this child represented, proof that from the darkest moments could come the most beautiful beginnings, that love could grow in unexpected soil, that home wasn't a place you were born into, but something you created with the people you chose." Hope Calloway grew up surrounded by love, not just from her parents, but from the extended family of ranch hands who competed for the privilege of holding her, from the women who passed through the refuge and often returned to visit, from the community that slowly, grudgingly, came to respect what the Calloways had built. Years later, when Hope was 5 and playing in the garden with Jack's granddaughter, Clara stood at the kitchen window watching her and felt a hand slip into hers. "What are you thinking about?" Ethan asked. "Christmas," Clara said. "The night you took a bite of gingerbread and said it tasted like home." "It did. It does." Ethan squeezed her hand. "You still make those horses?" "Every Christmas. Tommy Fletcher's children request them specifically now." Clara smiled. "Margaret Winter's daughter even asked for the recipe last year." "Did you give it to her?" "Of course. The recipe was never the point. The love you put into making them is what matters." She turned to face him. "My father taught me that. You reminded me of it, and now we're teaching it to Hope." Ethan pulled her close, and they stood together watching their daughter play, the ranch bustling with life and purpose around them. Somewhere in the distance, Clara could hear Danny singing as he worked, Jack's voice calling instructions, the low of cattle and whinny of horses creating the soundtrack of their life. This was home. Not the house in Silver Ridge where she'd grown up, not even the cabin where she'd first found refuge, but this, the life she and Ethan had built together from nothing more than kindness and courage and stubborn hope. "Do you ever regret it?" Ethan asked quietly. "How we started? The scandal? The gossip? Everything we went through?" Clara thought about it seriously. The humiliation at the Christmas celebration, the arrest, the judgment, the fear. Then she thought about the women they'd helped, the family they'd created, the daughter playing in the garden, the love that had grown from such unlikely soil. "No," she said firmly, "not for a single moment, because all of it, the good and the bad, brought us here. And here is exactly where I want to be." That evening, after Hope was tucked into bed with a story and a kiss, Claire returned to the kitchen to find Ethan had already started cleaning up from dinner. They worked together in comfortable silence, a dance they'd perfected over 3 years of marriage. When the last dish was dried and put away, Ethan pulled her into his arms in the middle of the kitchen. "Dance with me," he said. "There's no music." "Don't need music." He began humming, something soft and slow, and guided her around the kitchen floor in a gentle waltz. Clara laughed, resting her head against his chest. "You're ridiculous. I'm in love." "Same thing." They swayed together as the sun set outside, casting long shadows through the windows. In the morning, there would be breakfast to cook, ranch work to do, possibly a new woman arriving who needed help. But for now, there was just this. 2 people who'd found each other against all odds, creating music where there should have been only silence. And that, Clara thought, as Ethan spun her gently around the kitchen that had become the heart of their home, was everything. This was what her father had meant about putting love into what you created. This was what it meant to build a home, not from walls and wood, but from choice and compassion and the daily decision to show up for each other. The ranch continued to grow and change over the years. They added a proper shelter building, expanded the garden, bought more land. Women came and went, some stayed in touch, others disappeared into their new lives, all of them carrying with them the knowledge that they'd been worthy of help, of care, of a second chance. Clara never returned to Silver Ridge except when absolutely necessary. The town had changed some. New families, new businesses, a slow shift toward tolerance if not acceptance. But it would never be home, and Clara had made her peace with that. Home was here, on this ranch, with this man, surrounded by this chosen family. Home was Hope learning to bake gingerbread horses in the same kitchen where Clara had once felt like an intruder. Home was Ethan's hand in hers at the end of each day, the quiet confirmation that they'd built something lasting. On the anniversary of their marriage, their real marriage, the day they'd made it official in their hearts, if not on paper, Clara baked a special dinner. All of Hope's favorite foods, plus an apple pie that made the house smell like cinnamon and memories. After dinner, after Hope was asleep, Ethan presented Clara with a gift, a small wooden box, hand-carved with roses. "Open it," he urged. Inside was a ring, properly sized this time, delicate gold with a small blue stone. "To replace my father's ring," Ethan explained, "though you can keep that too if you want. But I wanted you to have something that was just yours, just ours." Clara slipped off the two large rings she'd worn for 3 years and let Ethan slide the new one onto her finger. It fit perfectly, catching the lamplight and throwing sparkles across the wall. "It's beautiful," she whispered. "You're beautiful and brave, and you've made me happier than I ever thought possible." Ethan took both her hands in his. "Thank you for choosing me, Clara. Thank you for making this life with me." "Thank you for defending me when no one else would," Clara replied, "for seeing value in gingerbread horses and the woman who made them, for giving me a home when I had nowhere to go." "You gave me a home too," Ethan said. "I just didn't realize the house was empty until you filled it." They stood together in the quiet kitchen, the heart of their home, and Clara thought about the journey that had brought them here. From that Christmas celebration where she'd been mocked and humiliated, through the desperate flight and unexpected marriage, to this moment of peace and belonging. She'd learned so much, that home wasn't about 4 walls, but about the people inside them, that family could be chosen, not just inherited, that love could grow from the most unlikely beginnings, if you were brave enough to nurture it. And most importantly, she'd learned that she was worthy of love, of respect, of a place in the world. Not because of anything she'd done or achieved, but simply because she existed. Because she was Clara Calloway, wife and mother and refuge keeper, baker of gingerbread horses and builder of homes. Outside, the first snow of the season began to fall, dusting the ranch in white. Hope would be delighted in the morning, would want to build snowmen and catch flakes on her tongue. The men would need extra coffee to ward off the cold, and life would continue in its beautiful, ordinary way. But for now, Clara stood in her husband's arms in the kitchen that had witnessed so much of their story and felt nothing but gratitude. Gratitude for the journey, for the destination, for every difficult step that had led her here. She was home. Finally, completely, irrevocably home. And no one in Silver Ridge would ever laugh at her again. Not because she'd proven them wrong or made them sorry, but because their opinions no longer mattered. She'd found something more valuable than their approval. She'd found herself, and the people who loved that self exactly as she was. That was worth more than all the acceptance in the world.